Chapter 579. Everything in the world was in the cause and effect. 10 years of life and death. Inside and outside the lonely grave. Even though I love you 3,000 times, I still have to turn around and leave. A bosom friend in the high mountains and flowing rivers. An old friend who collects the corpses at the city gate. Hearing the words of the owner, I will travel 1,000 miles to kill someone for the owner. There is no need for the owner to say anything. I will fight my way through the sea of people for the owner, even if there are tens of thousands of people. All these are the causes and effect. There is no need to talk about the coming of the mortal world like the flowing river, and there is no need to talk about 3 lifetimes and 3 lifetimes. One would toss and turn on the pillow and forget the taste of food, making one look haggard and haggard. There is a flower in the middle of the mountain, enduring the sunshine and rain for many years. If you happen to pass by and take a look at it, it is the cause and effect of the two of you. If you leave the mountain, nobody will take a look at it, and it is the cause and effect of the two of you. When someone comes and takes a look at it, he builds a thatched hut by the flower and stays there, taking care of and watering the flower every day. Only then will another cause and effect come into being. Every cause and effect of a person is a straight line from one point to another. Countless causes and effects are innumerable lines, and those lines will meet at a certain point, which means they will lead to that point. And that point is you. Who am I? I am Jingyang. Who is Jingyang? A person came to Aoyama from Zhaoga City many, many years ago. He started his cultivation and stayed behind closed doors on the peak of Shangda Peak. Once in a while, he would eat hot pot with his big brother, Lu Xiai and Yuan Qijing. In the following years, he spent most of his time in a daze, and he had helped the Devil Sword and the Devil Cat evade the pursuit of his big brother and the dead dog. A few decades ago, he was on the verge of ascension, and he wanted to make some preparations for Aoyama. As such, he went to Zhaoga City and saw the baby in the belly of the woman amid the flying snow. A few years later, he saw another baby in a small village. Jingyang was not the person with the name Jingyang, the memory and talent of Jingyang, and the appearance of Jingyang. This was because one's appearance could be changed, one's memories and talent could be inherited, and one's name could be changed. In fact, Jingyang was not Jingyang. He was Zhao Liu and Lu Shisui's master, Yuan Qijing's junior martial uncle, the resentful owner of the broken porcelain pieces in Duke Lu's residence, and the person that the whole of Aoyama had watched for 1,000 years. We are not us. We are the children of our parents. We are the parents of our children. We are the partners of our partners. We are the drinking buddies of our drinking buddies. We are the gambling partners of our gambling partners. We are what the world sees us as. The point of cause and effect is us. And we are the cause and effect of the world. So, if you want to prove that we are who we are, please start from the other end of those karmic lines. Only then can you be irreplaceable. Tianguang Peak was very quiet, because not many people could understand what Jingjiu was saying. I am the direction of all my causes and effect. In fact, that was all he said. The rest were the different perceptions of everyone. Yuan Chu kept scratching his head, almost causing smoke to come out again. He seemed to understand, but not really. Gu Qing opened his eyes and looked at his master beside him. He had successfully broken through the realm, but his mind was thinking about that year on the sea of ice and wind, the straight line that led to the Arctic. Zhao Liu was also thinking about the straight line that broke through the sea of ice and wind. Zhuoruzhui was also thinking about it. The peaks of Aoyama were shrouded in a very mysterious atmosphere. Suddenly, an extremely angry shout rudely destroyed the atmosphere. Even if you have a beautiful tongue, you can't change the fact that you are a sword demon. The shout came from the crowd of Tianguang Peak. It was the same person. After Jingjiu killed a mortal Tai Lu with a punch, this person had reprimanded him, asking if he was going to kill all the disciples of Aoyama. The elder of Tianguang Peak, by Rujing, was finally released after being imprisoned in the sword jail for many years. Bai Rujing walked out from the crowd, stared at Jingjiu, and said harshly, "You sword demon, surrender now." The young Zen master was pondering what Jingjiu had just said, finding it quite interesting. He couldn't help but feel displeased when he was suddenly interrupted by this shout. He looked at Bai Rujing with furrowed brows, wondering if Bai Rujing had a damn death wish. But many cultivators didn't understand what Jingjiu said. They were reminded by this shout, "That's right, why should I listen to this sword demon?" Jingjiu's refusal to take out the sword of inherited heaven had made most of the cultivators accept what Fang Jingtian and the child in blue said. They couldn't believe that Jingjiu was immortal Jingyang just because of his vague words. In their eyes, Jingjiu was the sword demon who killed immortal Jingyang and stole the position of the sect master of Aoyama. Moreover, this sword demon was colluding with the underworld. Who knew what he wanted to do? If he became the sect master of Aoyama, he would endanger the safety of Aoyama, the entire orthodox cultivation world, and even the human race. How could the cultivators allow such a thing to happen? Kill this demon! Bai Rujing looked at Jingjiu and shouted harshly. Along with this shout, dozens of flying swords flew up from all over Tianguang Peak, piercing the wind and pointing at Jingjiu and the hut. This was Aoyama. The cultivators of various sects didn't move, but the elders and disciples of Aoyama who hated evil couldn't stand it anymore. Looking at the dozens of sword lights in the sky, Bai Rujing was filled with boundless pride and the pleasure of revenge. But Jingjiu didn't look at him. A blood-red sword light illuminated the top of Tianguang Peak. The thoughtless sword pierced through the air and cut the leading flying sword in half coldly. Then, dozens of flying swords came from all over the peak, blocking the flying swords that intended to kill Jingjiu. The crisp sounds of flying swords colliding rang out like a rainstorm and then stopped abruptly. Hundreds of flying swords were divided into two groups, hovering in the sky above Tianguang Peak, trembling slightly, ready to strike again at any time. Among the flying swords that came to protect Jingjiu, there were disciples of Shangda Peak and disciples of Tianguang Peak. Surprisingly, dozens of flying swords were from disciples of Liangwang Peak. Everyone knew that Jingjiu didn't like Liangwang Peak. After he became the sect master, he imposed many restrictions on Liangwang Peak. The young disciples of Liangwang Peak complained about this. But why did it turn out like this? Seeing this, many people found it strange. Even Yuan Qijing was surprised. Guananshan turned his head around and glanced at Yao Songshan. Yao Songshan's ranking in Liangwang Peak had risen from 11th to 8th. He breathed steadily and looked straight ahead without saying anything. Guananshan looked at Lei Ilkyung again. Under the gaze of the eldest brother, Lei Ilkyung was a little surprised, but he said stubbornly, "What's wrong with protecting the sect master?" In fact, even he was doubting the identity of Jingjiu. But when he saw those flying swords flying toward the hut, he summoned his flying swords to fight without thinking. This was probably like the Battle of the West Ocean, when Taiping Jinren was about to be killed by the swordsmen of various sects, but Aoyama's sword just flew away. In the words of Elder Mochi, this was because he couldn't help it. Over 100 flying swords confronted each other in the sky, and the atmosphere was very tense. Everyone knew that this was just the beginning. Most of those who couldn't help it were the disciples of the younger generation. The elders of the peaks were still silent, especially the peak masters. Fu Wang, the peak master of Yunxing, looked a little hesitant. His thin and long right hand moved slightly in the wind, as if he could hold a sword at any time. Chen Yutian looked at the white cat in Jingjiu's chest with furrowed brows, thinking that the master white ghost wouldn't make a mistake. But he was a devil cat to begin with, so he must be close to the devil sword. Yuan Qijing looked at Jingjiu in the hut, waiting for him to say something before making a decision. Nan Wang looked at the mountain in the distance with his hands behind his back. He didn't look at the scene at all, as if he didn't care about it at all. The big figures kept silent for a long time, making the atmosphere more tense, and the disciples of the peaks of Aoyama even more at a loss. Guhan was ready to draw his sword. He looked at Guananshan and asked, "Senior brother?" Guananshan looked serious, indicating that he didn't know the answer either. He looked at Zhuoruzhui. "Don't look at me. I don't know anything." Zhuoruzhui said expressionlessly, "I may look calm, but I'm panicking inside, okay?" The silence couldn't last forever. The confrontation would eventually turn into a fight of swords. By then, the sky full of sword lights would definitely turn Tianguang Peak into ruins. Among the two camps, there were obviously fewer people who supported Jingjiu, and most of them were young disciples. Someone suddenly thought, Guangyuan Jinren was sent to the West Ocean not long ago, and he wasn't even allowed to come back to attend the sect leader's ceremony. Could it be that Jingjiu had already predicted today's situation? The atmosphere on Tianguang Peak was getting more and more tense. Suddenly, a dignified but tired voice sounded. "Since when has Aoyama been in such a difficult situation?" Though Yuan Qijing didn't show any expression on his face, everyone could see his anger and sadness. That day was the sect leader ceremony of Aoyama, and all the important figures in Chaotian were present. So many other sects were watching, but the situation had turned out this way. Was the Green Mountain sect going to stage a fight between their own sect members in front of so many outsiders? "I think so too," said Jingjiu. Fang Jingtian, the immortal Tai Lu, and Apiao were all plotted by his big brother. His big brother intended to oust him from the position of the sect leader of Aoyama and then kill him, because his big brother thought he was the all-in-one. In his big brother's opinion, Aoyama used swords, but he couldn't be used by swords. This was something he couldn't accept. Jingjiu walked to the foot of the stone monument and took a look at the distant Shinma Peak. "Let's go," he said while patting the back of the stone turtle. This statement didn't have a subject or a direction. Was he bidding farewell to the stone turtle or informing someone else? "Got it," said Zhao Lei. Gu Qing stood up and walked over with the sword of the universe in his hands, to invite his master to ride on it. Yuan Chu walked over with his head lowered, not daring to take a look at Yuan Qijing. "Want to leave? It's not that easy." Bai Rujing's cold voice rang out. An exceedingly formidable sword light slashed toward Jingjiu by the stone monument. Having been imprisoned in the sword jail for a few years, Yuan Qijing had carefully reviewed his defeat and was certain that Jingjiu's cultivation state was far inferior to his, and Jingjiu relied on the energy of the White Ghost to succeed in sneak attacking him. Though Jingjiu had killed the immortal Tai Lu with one punch, he had consumed a great deal of his energy, so he couldn't strike again. Of course, he wouldn't forget about the White Ghost, and he didn't expect to break through the defense of the White Ghost and hurt Jingjiu. What he wanted was a chaotic situation. A single spark could start a prairie fire. As long as the power of his flying sword could stimulate the fighting will of the crowd, countless flying swords would fall. Once the top of Tianguang Peak was in chaos, Jingjiu would definitely die. It took him only a short time to think about these things. His flying sword had already arrived by the stone monument and then disappeared. No one knew where that sharp sword light had gone. It couldn't show any power at all. It was like a bubble dissipating in the air. Ada closed his mouth and burped. A devilish blood color flashed in the depths of his vertical pupils. An enormous shadow of a white tiger appeared vaguely in the sky, exuding a terrifying pressure. It turned out that the flying sword had been swallowed by the white tiger. Bai Rujing's real sword was snatched away, and his sword pill was injured, spitting out a mouthful of blood essence. An exceedingly gorgeous blood-red sword light swept past. A miserable scream came from the top of Tianguang Peak. Two arms flew through the air and landed on the ground one after another. The thoughtless sword returned to the front of Zhao Lei. She calmly walked to the back of Jingjiu. She didn't even look at Bai Rujing, who had turned into a bloody man. Chapter 580. Everything happened too fast. The flying swords on the top of Tianguang Peak didn't react at all. That was why the disciples of Aoyama were so shocked. Once the flying swords were out, life and death would be decided immediately. The reason why they were shocked was not because of the blood on the cliff, the pair of broken arms, or the screaming elder by. The reason why they were shocked was not because of the result. Zhao Leia was the most talented genius in Aoyama sect, and she had reached the upper state of free travel at such a young age. Even though she hadn't reached the state of broken sea, she took the opportunity when Bai Rujing's flying sword was swallowed by the Lord White Ghost. The key was that none of the disciples of Aoyama expected that Zhao Leia would take the opportunity to take the sword out. The timing she chose to take the sword out was too cruel and merciless, giving people a feeling that she would do anything. The disciples of Aoyama could only see such a feeling from the evil sects. They didn't expect to see such a feeling from her. Zhao Lei had natural Taoist quality, and she was the most admired by the young disciples of Aoyama before Jingjiu. She was like a fairy in the eyes of others. Later, she became the master of Shenma Peak, holding a high position and power. She was far away from the ordinary disciples, and she was even more unreachable. Who could have expected to see such a scene today? It wasn't until now that many disciples of the Green Mountain remembered that Zhao Lei had killed many cultivation practitioners and demons back when she left the mountain to travel for the first time. Her cultivation state wasn't very high, but she had killed many cultivation practitioners and demons, shocking the whole human world. They couldn't help but feel bewildered, thinking that she was actually such a brutal person. Squatting on Jingjiu's shoulder, Ada took a look at Zhao Lei and then at Nan Wang, who was standing at the edge of the cliff and looking into the distance, wondering why they were all like this. You, a sword devil, dared to attack the elder of my sect. Fang Jingtian stared at Jingjiu and said coldly, after doing so many evil things, do you still want to leave Aoyama alive? Everyone saw with their own eyes that it was Zhao Lei who made the move, but it did not affect him from blaming Jingjiu for this. You've been extremely boring ever since you entered the sect, and today is especially so. You spoke too much, wanting to display your intelligence too much, yet you appeared very stupid, because intelligence is useless in the first place. Jingjiu looked at him and said, Your master is the smartest person in the world, but why has he still achieved nothing and can only wander around like a dog? Hearing this insult to his master, Fang Jingtian's eyes became even more gloomy and his killing intent became even stronger. Jingjiu said, It's because he's too smart and too competitive. He always wants to predict what I'm thinking, but he doesn't know that I have nothing else in my heart. I don't have any thoughts at all. I've never thought about how to convince you that I'm Jingyang, and I've never thought about being the sect leader. Then how can he defeat me? Fang Jingtian sneered and wanted to ask why you accepted senior brother Lu Si's posthumous edict if you don't have any thoughts. Why do you have to do so many things? Before he could speak, Jingjiu continued, You can't keep me here. Later, you'll ask why I didn't leave the inherited heaven sword and the seal of the king of the underworld behind, since I'm leaving. Many elders and disciples still couldn't decide which side to take. They thought that it was true and that it was fine to leave, but since you don't want to be the sect leader of Aoyama, you should leave the two treasures behind. Both the inherited heaven sword and the seal of the king of the underworld could only be controlled by the sect leader of Aoyama. I won't take out the inherited heaven sword, and I won't take out the seal of the king of the underworld. Jingjiu said calmly, because I won't hand over the sect leader of Aoyama. Hearing this, everyone was shocked. You're going to leave Aoyama with the people of Shenma Peak. Isn't that the same as abdicating? I'm Jingyang. Then I'm still the same as I was before. After saying this, Jingjiu led Zhao Lei and the others to the cliff. The top of Tianguang Peak was silent. No one knew what to say. What was the enlightened Jingyang like? The young disciples of Aoyama didn't know, but the 9 peak leaders like Fang Jingtian and Fu Wang and the experienced elders wouldn't forget. Uncle Jingyang didn't care about worldly affairs. He only knew how to cultivate in seclusion. Occasionally, when something big happened and he was disturbed by Lu Xi and Yuan Qijing, he would only say one sentence. That sentence was not the catchphrase of the Aoyama sect. Do you want to die? It was, really, annoying. So you didn't leave Aoyama because you were annoyed, but because you were annoyed? Seeing Jingjiu walking to the edge of the cliff, many cultivation practitioners had a feeling that it was absurd. Only the dead won't be annoyed. Fang Jingtian said expressionlessly. An extremely cold sword will appeared in the sky. The sea of clouds sensed it and extended countless fine threads, which looked like branches and leaves. At the end of those branches and leaves, there was a tangible sharpness condensed by the sword will. The sword will, which could bend and straighten, covered the entire sky like the branches of a plum tree that had been twisted by man. No matter how unpredictable and fast Jingjiu's movements were, he couldn't pass through it. Was this the power of a heavenly arrival state figure? How did Fang Jingtian do it? He had just reached the heavenly arrival state, but it was difficult for even a cultivator at the peak of the heavenly arrival state to cover the sky and earth in an instant. Today, Bai Zhenren was the one with the highest state, and she was the only one who had seen the truth. Fang Jingtian had been talking since he pushed the wheelchair to Tianguang Peak. Later, the immortal Tai Lu was punched to death by Jingjiu, and Bai Rujing's arms were chopped off by Zhao Leu, but he didn't do anything. He only spoke sullenly, angrily, with a sneer, of the evidence, and of the things that, by reason of reason, he ought to have said. As Jingjiu had said, it was really boring. Who would have thought that from the very beginning, he had been pouring the sword will in his body into Tianguang Peak through his feet. The sword will turned into the weakest strands, penetrated the mountain peak and reached the sea of clouds. Then it gradually accumulated until it finally formed the power of the sea. With a thought, he could cover the sky and earth and trap Jingjiu in Aoyama. Yes, the fourth disciple of Tai Pingzhenren, the one who had kept a low profile in Aoyama for many years, broke through the hermit peaks in just 7 years, and became a flower in the heavenly arrival state, Fang Jingtian. He could be boring, but how could he be incompetent? The sword will that covered the sky and earth fell like a storm. A flying sword slashed at Jingjiu. It came in a hurry, like a year old. The elders and disciples of Shilai Peak, and more disciples of Aoyama, who thought Jingjiu was the sword demon, also rushed over on their flying swords. The beautiful spring sun dimmed in an instant. Countless bright sword gleams illuminated the top of Tianguang Peak, piercing through the air. The flying swords that wanted to protect Jingjiu were instantly destroyed. The sky was filled with flying swords with unimaginable power. Even if Jingjiu was carrying Ada, it was impossible for him to block it, and he was about to be cut into pieces. Jingjiu did not seem to know that the hundreds of flying swords were about to fall, and still carried the cat to the edge of the cliff. Suddenly, a light mirror appeared in the sky. This light mirror was so large that it enshrouded the entire Tianguang Peak. Although it was called a light mirror, it was not transparent and it gave people a deep feeling. The surface of the light mirror was flowing with countless golden characters of scriptures. No, it should be said that it was flowing like a body. A tranquil and profound Zen will appeared among the peaks. A loud bang resounded. The light mirror blocked Fang Jingtian's like a year sword. The wind howled in the sky, the clouds scattered, and even the great formation of Aoyama was forced to show itself. The hundreds of flying swords that came from the elders and disciples of Aoyama also fell on the light mirror like a storm, giving off a thunderous sound. The golden characters of scriptures on the light mirror glowed brightly, and the hundreds of flying swords were knocked away. Grunts could be heard all over the peak. Fang Jingtian's body swayed slightly and his face paled. Even a connecting heaven state like him was at a disadvantage. What kind of treasure of Zen sect was that light mirror? He looked at a certain place in the sky and shouted sternly, "Does Zen master want to protect this sword demon?" At some point, Zen Master had already left the cloud platform, and came to his own lotus throne. He sat beside the lotus, his bare feet stretched out in the clouds, and his eyes were clear and innocent, like a playful child. However, the small mirror of light in his hand gave off an extremely terrifying feeling. You don't believe that he is the spiritual master of Jingyang? Zen Master looked at Fang Jingtian and said, But I believe him. The peaks of Aoyama fell silent once more. The flying swords that had been preparing to attack Jingjiu also gradually stopped. It was common knowledge that the spiritual master of Jingyang did not have many friends, the only exception being the Zen master of Guoqing Temple. The two had once discussed the Tao for 100 days at Shinma Peak, and their relationship was like that of a teacher and a friend. If one were to ask who was most familiar with the spiritual master of Jingyang, besides Yuan Qijing and Fang Jingtian, it would be him. His opinion was of course very important, and would affect the judgment of many people. Fang Jingtian extended his hand to call back the time sword, and expressionlessly said, This demon has seized martial Uncle Jing's soul and memories, so it is naturally very similar to martial uncle. Zen Master, do not be deceived by it. Zen Master laughed as if he had heard the most interesting thing in the world and said, You think I would be deceived? Guoqing Temple was most skilled in the two minds connection. This was something that everyone knew. Fang Jingtian's expression was rather unsightly, and he said, This is, after all, the internal affairs of our Aoyama sect. I ask that Zen Master not interfere. Zen Master's smile faded and he sternly said, You are wrong. Anything related to the spiritual master of Jingyang is a matter of the world, and anyone can interfere. Enough. Yuan Qijing's cold and stern voice echoed among the peaks. Looking at Jingjiu, who had already walked to the edge of the cliff, he said after a moment of silence, Please rest outside the mountain for a while, but don't go too far. Fang Jingtian's eyes turned cold, and he asked, What are you going to do, brother? I am the sword justice of Aoyama, Yuan Qijing said expressionlessly. I don't need your permission to do anything. This was the rule of Aoyama. Even though Fang Jingtian was already a figure in the heavenly arrival state, he had no reason and no right to overturn Yuan Qijing's decision. Fang Jingtian stared into his eyes and said, Zen Master also said that anything related to martial uncle is a matter of the world. I'm afraid that you alone can't decide this matter. If what the young Zen Master said was sensible, what Jingjiu said was also sensible. The choice of the sect master was indeed an internal affair of the Aoyama sect, and other sects had no right to interfere. But if the new sect master of Aoyama was a demon who colluded with the underworld, it would be a threat to the human race. How could other sects ignore it? Fang Jingtian's intention was clear. Now that Yuan Qijing chose not to discuss this matter, he had no choice but to make it known to the whole cultivation circle. Countless gazes were fixed on the cloud platforms in all directions. The first to express his opinion was the leader of Ozawa, who didn't have much of a presence. The benevolent-looking tall man with long hair draped over his shoulders shook his head and said, We have no objection. This was a neutral position. The sect master of the Mirror sect gave the same opinion after taking a look at Kanyang. He was inclined to believe that Jingjiu was the all-in-one sword, but who could be sure? And the relationship between the Mirror sect and the immortal Jingjiu had been quite good lately. The sects in the south that had the best relationship with the Aoyama sect were the Ozawa, the Mirror sect, the Platonist sect, and the No Mercy sect. The No Mercy sect was sealing off their mountains, so the Platonist sect was the next to express their opinion. Sitting in the wheelchair, Chen Xueqiao looked at the man in white clothing on the top of Tianguang Peak and said with a sweet smile, We of course trust the sect master Jing. Sensei felt helpless, and turned her head around to avoid looking at her mother. The Duke of He stood up and looked at Yuan Qijing, Fang Jingtian, and the others. He said respectfully and frankly, Whether the immortal sect master is the reincarnation of the immortal Jingyang or the all-in-one sword is a demon, I can't tell with my mortal eyes. But to tell the truth, I'm not worried at all. It's because the Emperor's decree states clearly that the sect master of Aoyama is the immortal Jingjiu. Hearing this, the crowd came back to their senses after a moment of bewilderment and understood what he meant. It was true. It didn't matter whether the immortal Jingyang took the sword or the sword demon took the spirit, as long as Jingjiu was still the same Jingjiu, it was enough. It was because the person the Emperor recognized was Jingjiu. Chapter 581. This State Duke, who had always kept a low profile, made such a statement and provided a new explanation, which made some people ponder over it. What made more people ponder over it was the relationship between the Emperor and Jingjiu. Zhaoga City still gave Jingjiu their unwavering support during the civil strife in Aoyama that day, and the situation was extremely complicated. Why? In the past 600 years, Zhaoga City and the entire Jing dynasty had been under the influence of the Zhongzhou school. But the situation had suddenly changed in recent decade. First of all, Jing Xin, who was supported by the Zhongzhou school, had been defeated many times in the succession of the throne. In the end, Jing Yao, who was supported by the Aoyama sect, was appointed as the crown prince. The whole of the cultivation circle was well aware of when the change started and who caused it. The most important person was Jingjiu. Countless gazes were fixed on the cloud platform where the Zhongzhou school was located. The Zhongzhou school and the Aoyama sect had been at odds for many years, so they were happy to see the chaos. Bai Zhenren wouldn't allow Yuan Qijing to let Jingjiu go. The Kunlun sect and the Aoyama sect had a grudge against each other, and the other sects in the north followed the Zhongzhou school's lead. Would the civil strife in Aoyama become another major war in the cultivation circle of Chaotian? Bai Zhao lifted her head and looked at her mother's profile, trying to figure out what she was thinking. Yet, her face was still shrouded by a layer of fog, so she couldn't see through it even though she was her own daughter. Bai Zhenren of course hoped that there would be a civil strife in Aoyama, but she was fully aware that it would not happen that day. If she hadn't come here in person, it might have been possible. She was quite satisfied with the outcome. The crack in Aoyama grew deeper and deeper, and it would become a natural barrier one day, making it impossible for the two sides to communicate with each other. This would be the beginning of the decline of Aoyama. Who would have thought that the words of the great grandmaster of the Foggy Island, Nan Chu, would be applied to Jingjiu? As expected, when all eyes fell on Bai Zhenren, the flying swords at the top of Tianguang Peak suddenly retracted without a sound. No matter how fierce the internal conflict in Aoyama was, no matter whether Jingjiu was a sword monster or not, the disciples of Aoyama were naturally aware of the pressure from Zhongzhou school. Yuan Qijing took a deep look at Fang Jingtian. Fang Jingtian knew that the outcome was set in stone, and he could not ask for more. It was already a victory for him to chase the sword monster out of Aoyama, but what about the two items? Elder Mo Chi sighed and handed the unconscious Bai Rujing to a disciple. He walked out of the crowd, looked at Jingjiu, and said, "Please leave the inherited heaven." Inherited heaven sword. Like most of the elders and disciples of Aoyama, Mo Chi believed that Jingjiu was the sword monster, but in his opinion, Jingjiu didn't even understand it himself. He didn't hate Jingjiu, but Jingjiu had just told Fang Jingtian that he couldn't keep him here, and he had to ask the inherited heaven sword in the end. Fang Jingtian couldn't ask Jingjiu again, so he had to come out and ask. Gu Qing turned around and said calmly and mildly, "Elder Mo Chi, my master is just out of the mountains to recuperate for a while." Though he didn't finish his sentence, the meaning was clear. What Yuan Qijing said was that Jingjiu was out of the mountains to recuperate, but it didn't mean that Jingjiu was no longer the sect master of Aoyama. As such, he didn't have to hand over the inherited heaven sword and the seal of the king of the underworld. Mo Chi was taken aback, but he thought what Jingju said made sense. He sighed again and stepped back. Gu Qing turned around and handed the sword of the universe to Jingjiu. Zhao Lei glanced at him and said, "We're leaving now." Looking at Zhao Lei, Fang Jingtian said in a deep voice, "You're the master of the Shenma Peak, but now you want to leave with this monster. Are you planning to betray the mountain gate? You and I are both the peak masters of Aoyama. What right do you have to control me?" Zhao Lei retorted with an indifferent expression. "You want to control me? Get the inherited heaven sword first." "You want the inherited heaven sword? No way. As for betrayal, I've only known that the immortal Jingyang is in Aoyama since I was little." Zhao Lei looked at Fang Jingtian and those disciples of Aoyama who had attacked them with their swords, and said expressionlessly, "That's why you're the traitors." The ocean of clouds outside the Tianguang Peak was usually higher and flatter than in other places, probably for the convenience of someone with long legs. Today, the immortal Tai Lu's sword will penetrated heaven and earth, and then Fang Jingtian's old-time sword blotted out the sky. The ocean of clouds rippled and turned into countless small clusters. Between those clusters of clouds, the scenery of Aoyama could be seen clearly. The sword-washing stream meandered among the peaks toward the outside of the mountain. That was the way to leave. Jingjiu sat on the sword of the universe. Yes. Even though he was pointed out by Fang Jingtian, he still chose to sit on the sword. A blood-red line pierced through the sky. The thoughtless sword left Zhao Lei and flew toward the Shenma Peak. The next moment, the restrictive formation on the Shenma Peak was opened, and the sword will burst out. Having done this, Zhao Lei also sat on the sword of the universe. Her movements were smooth, and her position was similar to that of sitting on the bamboo chair. Yuan Chu hastily took out the strange gray sword that he had just obtained. But he found it difficult to sit on it, so he had no choice but to stand on it. The two flying swords left the top of the Tianguang Peak and flew toward the blue sky and white clouds at a leisurely pace. They were not being expelled. They were leaving. Gu Qing took 2 steps toward the cliff's edge and waved his hand as a farewell. In the crowd on the peak, Sister Yushan also waved her hand discreetly. Some young disciples of Aoyama dared not do anything, but they silently said, "Take care." Mei Li and Lin Wuji looked at each other, feeling sentimental. Qin Yutian suddenly felt an emptiness in his heart, as if something was missing. Then he remembered. The great ancestor had also been taken away from Aoyama. Only Zhuoruzhui was concerned about something else. Looking at the sword that Yuan Chu was stepping on, he said while stroking his chin, "Not bad." The 2 flying swords flew toward the outside of Aoyama. Though they were not very fast, it didn't take long for them to become 2 black dots. Looking at the scene in the distance, Fang Jingtian was silent. After so many years of preparation and so much evidence, why did it end up like this? You don't understand why Tai Pingzhenren couldn't defeat him? Zen Master said, "Other than what immortal Jingyang said, I think there is another important reason." His words seemed to be directed at Fang Jingtian, but in fact it was also directed at the disciples of Aoyama and everyone present. Tai Pingzhenren's wisdom is unparalleled, his temperament is extraordinary, and he has countless supporters. Immortal Jingyang doesn't even have a few friends, so why has he never truly lost? Because Tai Pingzhenren has disciples and subordinates, while immortal Jingyang has people who agree with his ideals. Zen Master said, "The world is a community, so how can the world not help him?" Fang Jingtian's white eyebrows fluttered as he mocked. Even if he is Uncle Master Jingyang, using the words "the world is a community" to describe him is a bit too ridiculous. Everyone knew that immortal Jingyang didn't care about the affairs of the world. He only knew how to cultivate in seclusion, thinking about ascension. No matter what happened in the world, he didn't care. Even the Aoyama sect didn't seem to care, which was why the juniors of Aoyama complained. How could such a person be called a community? A word from Tai Pingzhenren and immortal Jingyang is like thunder, a sword moves the world, and a thought decides the life and death of millions. Zen Master said, "People like them don't do anything. That's the only way to be fair to all living beings." Zen Master's voice echoed among the mountains of Aoyama. It would definitely be remembered for many years. The scene of the two flying swords slowly leaving the mountains of Aoyama would definitely be remembered by the world of cultivation for many years to come. Jingjiu sat on the sword of the universe. His eyes were empty. His white robe fluttered. A sense of loneliness arose naturally. He was like a real immortal. Thinking of this scene and Zen Master's words, many disciples of Aoyama and cultivators from other sects were suddenly shaken. Could he really be immortal Jingyang? Right now, the loneliest person on Tianguang Peak was Apiao. If he could be counted as a human being. After Apiao finished talking about Taiping Jinren, no one paid attention to him. Whether it was the swords moving Aoyama or Zen Master's words moving the mountains, he just floated in the air alone. No one even looked at him. He was a bit anxious, thinking that this wasn't the plan. Shouldn't Jingjiu be imprisoned in the sword jail, and then his master's disciples would fight to reclaim the orthodoxy of Aoyama? If that was the case, he would be protected by Aoyama. Why would he be like this, a dead man with no one looking at him? Yes, he was the disciple of the royal family of the underworld, and also the successor of Taiping Jinren. His fate had been decided. Just like a letter that was opened and read, the ending was often forgotten in the pile of old papers, or directly thrown into the garbage, or torn to shreds. The worst was, of course, being burned to ashes. But it was obvious that he didn't have the self-awareness of being a letter. Let Yamatsai deal with this sorcerer. Buqiuxiao walked to the edge of the cloud platform and said to Yuan Qijing seriously. There were 2 times when he was ready to use the dragon-tail inkstone to suppress Jingjiu. But he hesitated because of what Zen Master said. He didn't strike in the end, but he would never let this underworld sorcerer go. No matter if he has forsaken the darkness for the light or not, this is Aoyama after all. Fang Jingtian said to him calmly. If Apiao was the successor of Taiping Jinren, he would be his young brother. He couldn't let Yamatsai take him away no matter what. The violent wind and snow suddenly enshrouded the top of Tianguang Peak. The cold intent was bone-piercing, like the will of the sword. A moment later, the wind and snow abruptly stopped. An ice cube of 5 square feet appeared on the ground, emitting a blue glow, looking like a huge sapphire. Apiao was frozen inside the ice cube, her eyes wide open and her mouth agape, showing a terrified expression on her face. Yuan Qijing was in a bad mood that day, so he struck out angrily. How many people in the world could resist him? Since it happened in Aoyama, he has to be locked in the sword jail of Aoyama, Yuan Qijing said to Buqiuxiao. Buqiuxiao furrowed his eyebrows slightly. After the death of the old dragon, the fiend prison had lost its former power. The most heavily guarded place in the orthodox cultivation circle was of course the sword jail of Aoyama. It shouldn't be a problem for this disciple of the royal family of the underworld to be locked in the sword jail, but there had been a bad precedent in the sword jail in recent years. Thinking of this, Yuan Qijing turned around and glanced at his student. Lu Shisui didn't notice that his teacher was looking at him. He was still staring at the ocean of clouds, speechless and bewildered, looking rather pitiful. Buqiuxiao felt a bit soft-hearted. "Go ahead," he said after a sigh. Lu Shisui came back to his senses after being taken aback for a moment, feeling overjoyed. Dozens of young disciples of Aoyama gathered together, most of whom were disciples of Liangwang Peak. Lei Ilkyung, Yao Songshan and other disciples looked at each other in silence, none of them willing to move their gazes away. Guananshan didn't heed them. He walked to the side of Zhuoruzhui and looked at the outside of Aoyama together with him, asking, "What do you think?" "I can't see it clearly," replied Zhuoruzhui. He wasn't sure whether Jingjiu was the senior Grandmaster Jingyang or the legendary Devil Sword. "What do you think?" asked Guananshan. Zhuoruzhui fell silent for a while before saying, I don't know. Do you want to go? Asked Guananshan. Zhuoruzhui said with drooping eyelids, in fact, I don't really want to go, I'm used to it. Guananshan sighed and said, let's go then. Chapter 582. Whether Jingjiu was the immortal Jingyang or the all-in-one sword, between the two sects of Aoyama, the latter had an overwhelming advantage. The disciples of Liangwang Peak also had to make their own choices. Guananshan thought that Jingjiu was the devil sword, but what if he was the Grand Master Jingyang? It was well known that Jingjiu was the peak master of Tianguang Peak. The people of Shenhua Peak all followed Jingjiu, but none of them went to Tianguang Peak. It didn't feel right at all. It was not necessarily a bad thing for Zhuoruzhui to go to Tianguang Peak with Jingjiu. At least they had a chance to make up for it in the future. He warned in a low voice, don't let too many people see you. Zhuoruzhui uttered In addition to Apiao, who was frozen into a blue gem, there was another person on Tianguang Peak that attracted the most attention. There were fewer people on Shenhua Peak than monkeys. Zhao Leu and Yuan Chu left with Jingjiu, and Ping Yongka stayed on Sword Peak, leaving only Gu Qing. For some reason, he didn't leave Aoyama with the others. An elder of Shilai Peak looked at him and asked indifferently, What are you doing here? Gu Qing said mildly, Shenhua Peak needs someone to take care of it. If there is any urgent matter that needs to be dealt with by the sect master, I can convey it to him in time. Hearing this, the others felt it was ridiculous, thinking that Jingjiu had left Aoyama and lost his protection. He might be assassinated by someone one day, and it was impossible for him to return to Aoyama. He claimed that he was still the sect master of Aoyama. Do you think he could continue to be the sect master? Gu Qing didn't think it was ridiculous. After Jingjiu left, someone had to guard Shenhua Peak and Aoyama. Zhao Layer glanced at him before leaving, which was what she meant. This was tacit understanding. When Jingjiu and Zhao Layer traveled the world, it was Gu Qing who guarded Shenhua Peak. At that time, he wasn't even a direct disciple, he was just a tenant. How absurd! He Wei's cold voice came from the sky. You're the disciple of that sword demon. How are you qualified to stay in Aoyama? Since when did the matters of Aoyama fall under the jurisdiction of Kunlun? Guananshan and other disciples of Liangwang Peak didn't care that this person was the sect master of Kunlun. They looked at him with eyes as sharp as swords. Fang Jingtian raised his eyebrows. Gu Qing smiled and didn't mind. He knew what he would have to endure if he stayed in Aoyama, and he was prepared to endure the humiliation for decades. It was then that Zhuoruzhui came to his side and said, Let's go together. There's no point in staying here and pretending to be a lonely subject. It's meaningless. After a moment of silence, Gu Qing said, You have a point. I'm a cultivation practitioner after all. Zhuoruzhui said in a mocking tone, You're quick to step down. If you want to leave, just say so. There's no need to put on a show. Gu Qing didn't dare to say this to Senior Master Leu, so he said, I don't have a sword again. Zhuoruzhui called out the swallowing boat sword and said, This is the second time you've used a sword. Gu Qing said calmly, Spit out the beef and mutton, tripe, green garlic, and the energy of heaven and earth. For years ago, when Jingjiu went to the North Cold Sea to hunt down Taipingzhenren, they went back to Aoyama first. Gu Qing didn't have a sword back then, so he and Zhuoruzhui had to squeeze on the swallowing boat sword all the way. The swallowing boat sword was like a salted fish, not spacious enough, but they had traveled tens of thousands of miles together, so they could arrange each other's positions skillfully. Seeing that gray flying sword flying slowly toward the outskirts of Aoyama, the elders and disciples of Aoyama were all stunned. It was obvious that the gray flying sword was going after Jingjiu and the others. Zhuoruzhui was the most favored personal disciple of the immortal Lu Xi, but he was going to leave as well? Guananshan smiled bitterly, thinking that they had agreed not to let too many people see him. Zhuo Rujui's departure was like a flame falling into a barrel of oil. Yao Songshan and Lei Ielkyung walked out of the crowd almost at the same time. They knelt down in front of Yuan Qijing and asked to leave. Then, more and more young disciples showed up. There were at least a dozen of them, and they all expressed the same wish. Junior sister Yushan widened her eyes, thinking that this was possible. She subconsciously looked at her master, Qi Yan. Qi Yan knew about her relationship with Shinma Peak, and he knew what she wanted to do. His face darkened and he said, "Go back to the peak and copy the record of mind capturer twice." Junior sister Yushan replied with a wronged "oh" and stood back obediently. The young disciples of Aoyama did not get the same treatment as Zhuoruzhui. "What are you talking about? Don't cause any more trouble." Yuan Qijing scolded coldly, and ordered the masters to bring the young disciples back. Jing Jiu left Aoyama. He left with the inherited heaven sword, the seal of the king of the underworld, Zhao Leu, Yuan Chu, Gu Qing, Zhuoruzhui, and many other young disciples. Only these young people left with him, but they were the future of Aoyama. Then the representatives of Ozawa, Platonist sect, and other sects also left with a lot of emotions. No matter whether the young master of Aoyama was the reincarnation of immortal Jingyang, or the all-in-one sword, he was the top existence in Aoyama. Would his departure lead to the division of Aoyama, or even the division? Of course, this was based on the fact that he could continue to live, and he had to live for a few more years. The small green curtain sedan flew toward the outside of the mountain, followed by the pair of master and disciple of Shui Yu Nunnery. Yuan Qijing had a general idea of what Jing Jiu had done, so he wouldn't blame Shui Yu Nunnery for what had happened to Opiao. Shui Yu Nunnery hadn't spoken a word from beginning to end that day. It wasn't until they left Aoyama that she suddenly said to Jingtao, "You should go and have a look when you have time." Jingtao knew where her master meant, but she didn't understand why she was asked to go. She nodded in bewilderment. The cloud boat of the Zhongzhou school was the last to leave Aoyama. Before leaving, Bai Zhenren said to Yuan Qijing, "Everybody knows that the person who came out from the fiend prison is him. The Cloud Dream sect can't pretend to be deaf and dumb anymore, and we have to do something for the old dragon. If he leaves Aoyama, we will find a way to kill him. After all, he is merely a devil." Yuan Qijing didn't say anything. Soon after the cloud boat entered the territory of Yu County, Xiang Wanshu knelt down in front of Bai Zhenren, saying nervously, "Big sister is missing." Bai Zhenren's reaction was quite strange. It was because she was very calm. Yuan Qijing returned to the Shangda Peak. He brought the blue ice cube to the bottom of the well and threw it into a corner. The blue block of ice hit the stone wall and bounced a few times before stopping, letting out a crisp sound. It was as if it was made of gold and stone. One could imagine how hard it was and how cold it was. Apiao was frozen in the ice cube, head up and feet down. She looked terrible, but the glow in her eyes hadn't disappeared yet. It looked like she was still alive. There was an endless cold source at the bottom of the Shangda Peak. If the blue ice cube was stored here, it would never melt. It was unclear how long he would be frozen in the ice cube. Let him live. Someone might want him in the future, Yuan Qijing said to the dead dog. The expression in the eyes of the dead dog was still as warm and nonchalant as before. Though it looked calm, it could convey many meanings. He had no interest in this little royal member of the underworld, and only cared about one thing. Was Jing Jiu a human being or a sword? "I don't know," Yuan Qijing said after a moment of silence. "Maybe he doesn't even know." Though he hated his master the most, he had to admit that what Taiping Zhenren asked Apiao to say was probably true. The dead dog lifted his head slowly and looked at the sunlight above. "Even if he is the all-in-one and has inherited the spiritual soul and memories of the senior master, he is merely a second senior master in my eyes, as long as the senior master isn't killed by him," Yuan Qijing said. "It's better than calling him the great ancestor." The dead dog pulled back his gaze and looked at Yuan Qijing in silence to show his agreement. A principal guard who had lived in Aoyama for a great many years would feel it odd when he suddenly found a divine object of a higher status and older than him. Yuan Qijing sighed and said, "Regardless of whether he is the senior master or the all-in-one, he has left." The dead dog showed an apologetic expression in his eyes. If he hadn't ignored him on purpose, Fang Jingtian wouldn't have brought the immortal Tai Lu out of the sword jail. It's been a few years, but he hasn't asked me for the great formation of Aoyama, and he didn't ask us to do anything this time to take the opportunity to leave. I think he is tired of it. After a moment of silence, Yuan Qijing suddenly sneered. No, I think he is being lazy again. The gray swallowing boat sword flew slowly toward the outside of the peaks. Fortunately, the sword of the universe flew even slower, so it didn't take long for it to catch up with it. Yuan Chu turned around and found it was Zhuoruzhui, but he didn't feel surprised. "You are here," he said. In the next moment, he saw Gu Qing behind Zhuoruzhui, asking in surprise, "Big brother, aren't you going to take care of the house?" Zhao Leia was puzzled as well, shooting a glance at Gu Qing. Gu Qing uttered, before saying, "The Shenma Peak has been sealed off, so there shouldn't be anything serious. It's more important for me to take care of my master." Jingjiu didn't turn around. He sat at the front of the Sword of the Universe, looking like a shepherd boy sitting on the back of an ox saying, "That's right. There is nothing in this world that can't be let go." Hearing this obvious pun, Zhuoruzhui thought that Gu Qing wouldn't dare let go of so many things that he had given to him. After the brief conversation, the 3 swords and 5 others had passed the sword-washing stream in the sky. They had passed through the great formation of Aoyama easily by relying on the command board. The world here was real, but it was also a bit surreal because the weather was too good. The sky was blue and the sun was red. It felt warm and comfortable when it shone on people's faces. It didn't look like winter at all. Zhuoruzhui looked at the red sun with narrowed eyes, thinking of the unknown road ahead after leaving Aoyama. He didn't feel perplexed. Instead, he felt a boundless heroic spirit. Just like in the Guoqing temple years ago, when he saw the cloud boat competing with the setting sun, he thought heroically, "What's the big deal about starting a war with the Zhongzhou school?" Looking at the distance ahead, he said sentimentally, "What's there to be afraid of even if we have to go to the ends of the world?" Gu Qing glanced at him and said, "We're almost there." The sword lights illuminated Cloudy Town. Jing Jiu and the others arrived at the restaurant. Zhuoruzhui didn't understand Gu Qing's words, thinking that it was indeed the tradition of the Shenma Peak that one should have a hot pot before doing anything important. The red soup and the white soup boiled one after another, and all kinds of dishes jumped into the pot as if they were thrown into a river. The crowd was either eating or watching in silence. No one spoke. The atmosphere was a bit depressing. Zhuoruzhui thought that he should figure out where to go first. He had eaten 7 plates of the most delicious and tender mutton, and found a few alternatives. Since he was expelled from Aoyama, he had to go somewhere far away. But where was the safest place to go? The cultivation circle was certain that Jingjiu was a sword devil, and he was a heavenly treasure himself, not to mention the precious magic treasures. Even though many cultivation sects didn't dare do anything because of the attitude of Zen Master and Zhaoga City, those devil men of the deviant sects and the Zhongzhou school wouldn't let them off easily. The best answer was the alien land, but it was too far away, and the godly swordsmen of West Ocean might be there as well. It would be a lucky encounter if they met each other. White Town was also a good place. With the support of Zen Master and the attitude of the Broadsword King, it was safe there. However, it was too cold there and the spiritual energy was thin. Most importantly, it was too close to the Snowland. If the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom went south, or if the monster invasion occurred again, it would be troublesome. It was better to go to the Guoqing temple directly. He hadn't hugged that stone pagoda for many years. Zhuoruzhui said it out loud as he thought of all this. Gu Qing shot him a glance, thinking that he had already said it out loud. Zhao Lei said, "We won't go anywhere else, we'll stay right here." Zhuoruzhui had finally understood what they meant. He opened his mouth, but couldn't utter a word, as if he was about to eat another 7 plates of fresh mutton. There was a small mountain outside Cloudy Town, on which some residential houses and some farmlands were scattered. 4 years ago, these residential houses and farmlands were bought by a mysterious buyer, and they were renovated soundlessly. In the end, a large manor house was built. When the manor house was built, it was protected from sight by a formation, and the clouds and fog lingered all year round. As a result, not many people knew about its existence. The sword light illuminated the front of the mountain, and the clouds and fog dispersed, exposing the true appearance of the manor house. There was a brook in the manor house, and there were flowering trees by the brook. The fog flowed along with the water, and the pavilions were faintly discernible. It was like a fairyland. Looking at the scenery in front of him, Zhuoruzhui opened his eyes wide. He was not as tired as he usually was. He said in shock, 4 years ago, you were ready to leave? Jingjiu responded with an Everyone at the Shenma Peak knew what he was thinking, or at least they could guess what he was thinking. 4 years ago, he asked the Gu family to build this manor house, and he also informed Yuan Qijing to hold the grand ceremony of the sect master 4 years later. It was obvious that he was ready to leave. Zhuoruzhui couldn't understand it, thinking that even if he had arranged it, he was still banished from Aoyama, but after he left Aoyama, he had to live in Cloudy Town, which was so close. Didn't he feel ashamed? The scene of a stray dog lingering in a nearby alley was too tragic. Jingjiu didn't feel ashamed. Cloudy Town was very close to Aoyama, and it was the safest place to live. Zhuoruzhui believed that Guoqing Temple and Zen Master would protect him, but he trusted Aoyama the most. Even though most of the elders and disciples believed that he was the sword devil who killed Jingyang, as long as Yuan Qijing was alive, he would not let Aoyama do anything to him. But at this moment, they suddenly felt a strong sense of danger. The thoughtless sword flew out soundlessly, drawing a straight red line in front of them. On the other side of the red line was the front door of the manor house. A young girl stood in front of the door. The young girl's short skirt was fluttering, and silver bells were ringing all over her body. Even though she was expressionless, she still looked cute and adorable. She stared at Jingjiu with eyes full of killing intent. Nan Wang, it seemed that he still couldn't forget it. Chapter 583. So many things had happened in the grand ceremony of the sect master of Aoyama that day that many people had neglected another strange event. That was the peak master of Qingrong, Nan Wang, hadn't spoken a single word from beginning to end. She either looked at the distance or turned her back to them. Few people had even seen her face. She shouldn't have behaved so nonchalantly, no matter whether she was the most favored young sister of the immortal Lu Ci's generation or the rumored unruly princess of the south who hated senior master Jingyang the most. Unexpectedly, she had followed Jingjiu in secret and was the first one to come to the gate. Gu Qing, Zhuoruzhui and Yuan Chu didn't know what had happened in the past, and they didn't understand why she stood in front of the gate. All they knew was that she exuded a dangerous aura, so they couldn't help but be alarmed, wondering if she was going to kill Jingjiu with her own hands to wash away the humiliation of Aoyama. Nan Wang turned around and walked toward the small courtyard. Jingjiu waved his hand to dismantle the formation, and followed her into the small courtyard. Zhao Lei drew back the thoughtless sword, motioning for the others to stay where they were and not to disturb them. Zhuoruzhui and the others didn't understand why Nan Wang didn't fear that something might happen to her since the murderous intent on her was so obvious. Ada of course wanted to stay, but he was pressed tightly in Jingjiu's bosom. The fur around his neck was grasped so tightly by Jingjiu that his face was deformed, and his eyes were tilted upward, showing a frivolous expression. Gu Qing walked to the side of Zhao Lei, feeling worried and wanting to know what was going on. Boom! A sudden clap of thunder startled him. The clap of thunder didn't come from the sky, but from the deep end of the courtyard. Though it was loud, it wasn't muffled, but rather crisp. Gu Qing looked at the deep end of the courtyard in shock, wondering what was going on. A cloud of smoke rose up in the deep end of the courtyard, making people feel uneasy. This manor house was built by the Gu clan, and the marvelous formation that drew in the spiritual energy of heaven and earth by means of the mountain stream was designed by Jingjiu, and the defensive formation was designed by Gu Qing himself. Gu Qing had learned the inherited heaven sword style for many years. Though he was not as good as Zhuoruzhui and Lu Shisui, he had spent a few years setting up the formation, so it was still quite strong. With the protection of the array formation, the three-story wooden building in the depths of the courtyard did not completely collapse. Only half of it collapsed. The formation gradually disappeared and the dust settled, revealing the scene on the field. Jingjiu stood in front of the collapsed wooden building. His whole body was covered in sawdust, and he looked extremely pathetic. The most embarrassing part was his face. He had the most perfect face in the world. Even his enemies couldn't help but admit that it was a true work of art and couldn't bear to hurt it. However, at this moment, a very clear palm print appeared on his face, and the red mark was slowly fading away. It was obvious that he had been slapped by Nan Wang. Ruthlessly. "Why didn't you hide from me? Do you feel ashamed of me?" Nan Wang asked expressionlessly. She was the last disciple of Tai Pingzhenren and the true god worshipped by the Southern Man tribe. She had an amazing talent. Recently, she had started to cultivate seriously and entered the peak of the Broken Sea state in a few years, and tied with Shui Yu nunnery. If she hadn't fallen in love, she wouldn't have stagnated for so many years. "It's not that I feel guilty. It's you." A teenager appeared in front of Jingjiu. The teenager liked to sit on the edge of the cliff and swing his long legs. Many years ago, the teenager was very fat, but he gradually lost weight. The whole of Aoyama knew why. "Then why didn't you let him marry me?" Nan Wang was still expressionless, staring at Jingjiu without blinking her eyes. It was unclear whether it was because she had stared at him for too long or for other reasons, but her eyes turned red slowly. Jingjiu said, "Lu Xi likes you, but you don't like him. How can you be his cultivation companion?" Nan Wang said loudly, "I told you at the time that I like him." Jingjiu said after a moment of silence, "You want to marry him just to annoy me. Of course, I won't agree. You don't want to marry me, and you don't allow me to marry anyone. That's too domineering." Nan Wang couldn't stand it anymore, and raised her hand to slap him again. Jingjiu stood where he was without any intention of dodging or raising his cat. He just looked at her in silence. Maybe he couldn't bear to do it, or maybe he thought that she was his senior uncle. Nan Wang's second slap didn't land on his face. It turned into a small fist and landed on his chest. There was a loud bang. The wind howled, and the remaining 3 floors of the wooden building all collapsed. Dust and smoke rose. Outside the courtyard, Gu Qing, Zhuoruzhui, and Yuan Chu heard the thunder and felt the vibration under their feet. They were startled again. They looked at Zhao Lei. Zhao Lei closed her eyes, sitting on the ground and cultivating. She didn't pay any attention to what was happening in the courtyard. The dust settled again. A large pit several feet deep appeared in front of the ruins of the wooden building. Nan Wang cried, "Only my senior brother spoiled me, and you didn't let me marry him. Now look. He's dead. You've become like this, and I'm still alone. Are you satisfied now? How could you be so cruel?" Jingjiu stood at the bottom of the pit, covered in mud. His white robe was full of holes, and he looked extremely miserable. Ada wasn't lifted up to resist, so he was quite satisfied. But he didn't have the slightest sympathy for Jingjiu. He just raised his head and looked at Nan Wang, who was crying like a fool, thinking how pitiful the little girl was. Jingju didn't say anything, not because he was lazy or indifferent, but because he really didn't know what to say. It was quiet for a long time. The tears and emotions on Nan Wang's face were all blown away by the wind, leaving only a trace of sadness on her face. She asked, "You've never liked me, have you?" Jingju thought for a while and answered, "I like mountains, rivers, and everything in the universe. Of course, you are one of them." Ada raised his head and glanced at him, wondering what he was doing. "Pooh!" Nan Wang spat at the bottom of the pit and said, "But I don't like you anymore. You look so ugly." Having said that, she raised her arm to wipe the non-existent tears off her face and turned around to leave. Standing at the bottom of the pit in silence for a while, Jingzhou asked, "Is my face still ugly?" Ada sighed, thinking that Jingzhou had become more normal when he heard Jingzhou talking about mountains, rivers, and everything in the universe. It turned out that Jingzhou was still the same as before. It wasn't a matter of face at all. No matter how beautiful your face is, it's not the face that Jingyang used to have. But since you said you liked her, why did you treat her coldly for hundreds of years? Was it because she liked drinking and singing when she drank too much? Hearing Ada's voice in his spiritual awareness, Jingzhou said, "Since we will part in the end, why did we have to be together in the beginning?" Ada was speechless again, thinking that what Jingzhou had said and what he had said before were too romantic. It didn't sound like what Jingzhou would say. Jingzhou didn't know what was on Ada's mind. He carried him back to the courtyard and said, "It's not good to be greedy." Ada wondered who Jingzhou was talking about. He ignored him and went to the eaves to bathe in the sun and calm his breath. He swallowed Bai Rujing's flying sword on the top of Tianguang Peak. Even though he was in the heavenly arrival state against someone in the broken sea state, he still had some hidden dangers. Jingzhou said it was not good to be greedy. Was this what he meant? The bright sunlight shone on the courtyard, making the 3-story wooden building in ruins stand out, or in other words, dazzling. He stood by the ruins in silence for a while, and waved his sleeves to send the broken beams and stones out of the courtyard. The Gu family received the news and sent the most capable people to the outside of Cloudy Town as soon as possible to start the cleaning work. More than 10 big formations with magic treasures kept transporting the garbage. It didn't take long for the cleaning work to be done. It was the third master of the Gu family who was in charge of the cleaning work. Seeing the ground at the downstream of the stream became empty again, he finally felt relieved. Then he started to think about what kind of flowers and trees he should plant. He didn't know the real situation of this courtyard. He only knew that it was the order of the one in the mountain, so the family had to treat it as the most important thing. But he didn't know why he felt something was wrong. The reason why the Gu family could leap from a medium family to one of the big families in Tianan 100 years ago was not because of Gu Han, the old master's favorite, but because of Gu Qing, the son of a concubine. To be more precise, it was because of Gu Qing's master. Could it be that something went wrong over there? The third master of the Gu family was a bit worried, but then he felt his worry was ridiculous. That was the sect master of Aoyama. What could happen? Zhao Leu walked into the courtyard with the other 3 people. She saw the big pit at first glance, and then pretended not to see it. Jingzhou had taken out a bamboo chair and was lying under the eaves, looking quite relaxed. Zhao Leu walked to the eaves and knelt down. It was the first time she knelt down in front of others. Gu Qing quickly knelt down as well, and Yuan Chu kowtowed a few times. Master was master, Uncle Master was Uncle Master, but to the disciples of Aoyama, the name Jingyang was the most special. Perhaps it was because of this that Zhuoruzhui knelt down very quickly today. His sincerity was genuine, and there was no pretense. Jingzhu waved for them to get up and asked Zhuoruzhui, "Are you going to continue freeloading?" Zhuoruzhui looked very innocent and said, "You're the sect master of Aoyama, and also a disciple of Tianguang Peak. Even a drop of water should be distributed fairly. Moreover, your Uncle Master Jingyang, and as the most outstanding disciple of the third generation, it's my duty to serve you. Gu Qing knew that his master didn't want to listen to these things and asked carefully, "Do you want to rearrange the ranking in the sect?" Zhao Lei had the same idea. She had always regarded herself as Jing Jiu's direct disciple, but she didn't make it clear in the past, and could only muddle along. Naturally, she couldn't continue like this now. If the ranking was to be rearranged, then the disciples of Shenhua Peak would naturally be counted as Jing Jiu's disciples. Zhao Lei would be the first, Gu Qing the second, Yuan Chu the third, and the little fellow who was forgotten in Yunxing Peak would be the last. Thinking of this possibility, Yuan Chu's expression changed, and he quickly said, "That's not appropriate, is it? Becoming the direct disciple of Zhenren Jingyang was the dream of all cultivators, but the problem was, Zhao Lei was his master. How could she suddenly become the eldest apprentice sister?" At this moment there was a sudden movement outside the courtyard, and the formation sounded a warning. Gu Qing walked out, and not long after, he brought in another person. It was Lu Shisui. Zhuoruzhui exclaimed in surprise, feeling that the commotion was getting more and more exciting, wondering how to arrange the ranking. But Zhao Lei noticed that there were bloodstains on the edge of Lu Shisui's sleeves, and she asked, "What happened?" Lu Shisui said, "I didn't have a token, so I was delayed when I left the mountain, and then I ran into the people of Kunlun." Why did he have to fight when he ran into the people of Kunlun? Given his temperament, it must be because of Jingjiu. The courtyard became quiet. Everyone was silent. They left Aoyama, came to Cloudy Town not far away, and settled in this courtyard. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, but there were many problems and even dangers waiting for them in the near future. Those problems and dangers were different from those of Nan Wang. Zhuoruzhui suddenly asked, "How did you know we were here?" Lu Shisui was taken aback and then said, "I asked around, and it seems everyone knows." Jing Jiu was not surprised. Who didn't know he was here when there were several thunders and earthquakes? Nan Wang did it on purpose. He wanted to disturb him. "I like you girls." Chapter 584. Not having peace and quiet was a small matter. The key was something else. Jingjiu thought he was still the sect master of Aoyama, but it didn't mean others would think so. He believed that it wouldn't take long before the whole cultivation world knew that he had been banished from Aoyama. The Aoyama sect wouldn't do anything to him when Yuan Qijing was here. But without the protection of the Aoyama sect, what would happen to a monster who had been accused of murdering the immortal Jingyang? Zhao Lei and the others looked at Jingjiu's face worriedly. Jingjiu didn't seem to notice it and asked, "Did you lose?" Zhuoruzhui was surprised to be concerned about such a thing at such a time, but Lu Shisui felt it was natural. He said with some shame, "It was an elder of the Kunlun sect who attacked me. My cultivation level was too low, so I couldn't handle it." Everyone knew the relationship between Lu Shisui, Jingjiu, and Aoyama. Moreover, he was Bu Qiuxiao's most valued student, so the Kunlun sect wouldn't go too far. Jingjiu said, "If I see him, I'll fight him back for you." "Okay," Lu Shisui said. Many people thought it was ridiculous for a child to ask his parents for help when he couldn't beat his opponent, but Jingjiu said it as if it was a matter of course, and Lu Shisui responded confidently. Zhuoruzhui yawned and reconfirmed that Zhao Lei and Lu Shisui were still the most favored ones. Yuan Chu was still thinking about the rearrangement of the Shenhua Peak, thinking that since Lu Shisui was back, who would be the first disciple? Jingjiu said, "It's too troublesome. Let's do it like before." Zhao Lei thought for a while and said, "Okay." Gu Qing didn't care. Yuan Chu breathed a sigh of relief, feeling much more comfortable this way. Lu Shisui had no idea what they were talking about. Zhuoruzhui thought it was a close call that he had almost become the junior of these people. It was impossible for him to do so. Jingjiu said that he wanted to rest for a while, so he continued to lie on the bamboo chair. The rest of them walked out. This house was extremely large, and there were at least 20 or so individual courtyards. Naturally, the distribution of the courtyards was not the focus of everyone's attention. You already knew? Zhuoruzhui looked at Zhao Lei and asked. Zhao Lei uttered softly. Zhuoruzhui asked, when did this happen? Zhao Lei said, it's been many years. It had indeed been many years. Although he had never made it clear, Jingjiu did not hide it from her. Whether it was related to In-san or the past of Aoyama, he always talked to her as Jingyang. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu fixed their gazes on her, feeling a bit jealous. But Lu Shisui said sympathetically, you must be under a lot of pressure, right? Not too bad, Zhao Lei said. In the past decades, she was the only one who knew Jingjiu's real identity. She was indeed under pressure, but more than that, it was the joy and pride of a little girl hiding candy. Zhuoruzhui was silent for a while, then suddenly said, actually, have you ever thought? He didn't finish his sentence, but everyone knew what he meant. The riverside became quiet. What Fang Jingtian had said, the immortal Tai Lu's testimony, and especially the blue-clothed boy. Jingjiu didn't take out the inherited heaven sword until the end. They left Aoyama with Jingjiu, but those questions were still there, pressing on their hearts like a mountain. What I don't understand the most is, why doesn't Senior Master want to walk on the sword? Yuan Chu kept scratching his head, so distressed that there seemed to be sparks between his fingers. Both the pair of prominent ears and the special body could be explained by the fact that he had been reborn as a sword. But he didn't want to walk on the sword. It was obviously a problem of his consciousness. Back then, he chose Senior Brother Mo's sword because the sword of the universe was wide enough for him to sit on. Zhao Lei walked to a rock by the riverside and sat down. Looking at the river flowing into the distance, she said, standing is better than sitting, and sitting is better than lying down. Thinking of the bamboo chair on the top of the Shinma Peak, the others thought it was true. If it weren't for the indecent posture, he could have been the first person in the world to walk on the sword lying down. Zhuoruzhui also thought it was reasonable, so he continued, one last question. The all-in-one sword is a heavenly treasure and has its own spirit. If Senior Master borrowed the body of the sword instead of the evil sword itself, where is the spirit of the all-in-one sword? I didn't ask and he didn't tell me. Zhao Lei drew back her line of sight and looked at a crabapple flower floating on the river, saying, maybe it was scattered by Ren when he ascended. It was quiet by the riverside for a while, probably because of the name Ren. What if it isn't? Zhuoruzhui stared at her back and said, what if he is really the all-in-one sword, but he doesn't know it? The stream flowed slowly, emitting a soft sound like countless sighs. Is it important? Yuan Chu asked, scratching his head. I don't care, said Lu Shisui. As far as he was concerned, the young master was the young master. It made no difference whether the young master was the great master of Jingyang or the so-called sword devil. Zhuoruzhui didn't give up. Looking at Zhao Lei's black hair fluttering in the wind, he asked, if he is really the senior master of Jingyang, why did he make such an arrangement 4 years ago? It was true. If Jingjiu was Jingyang, why did he think of retreating? The disciples of the younger generation all knew that Jingjiu always believed in one saying, retreat in order to advance. It was the last resort of the weak. Gu Qing said, my master must have predicted that Fang Jingtian would leave the Hermit Peaks and that Aoyama couldn't have internal strife. That's why he made such an arrangement. Looking at a green stone in the river, Zhuoruzhui said thoughtfully, he sent Senior Master Guangyuan to the West Ocean in advance to avoid any mishaps? Of course, my master also felt that being the sect master was a bit troublesome, said Gu Qing slowly. So he left the mountains to seek peace and quiet. Zhuoruzhui patted his shoulder sympathetically, saying, after hearing what you said, I finally believe that he is the senior master of Jingyang. Is the Ren you just mentioned the ancestor of Zhongzhou school? Lu Shui walked to Zhao Lei's side and asked her seriously. Zhuoruzhui, Gu Qing, and Yuan Chu were also concerned about the reason why the immortal Jingyang failed to ascend, but they thought it might be a secret, and it was inconvenient for Zhao Lei to tell them, so they refrained from asking. Lu Shui wouldn't tolerate it. Zhao Lei briefly told them what happened after Jingyang ascended. The river bank was quiet again. The young disciples of Aoyama were silent for a long time, feeling more pressure. If that was the case, then the battle between the Aoyama sect and Zhongzhou school would be inevitable. Zhao Lei stood up and left the river bank, saying, "Hurry up and cultivate." Looking at her back, Zhuoruzhui shouted, "Then we should ask the senior master to repair it." Zhao Lei waved her hand and didn't pay any attention to him, walking upstream. There were always crabapple blossoms floating in the river, so there must be a crabapple tree upstream. She walked to the crabapple tree, looked at the woman in white, and said, "If you want to go in, I'll ask Gu Qing to open the formation." Bai Zhao looked down at the misty manor at the foot of the mountain and said, "I'm here to say a few words to him, but it's better if you pass the message on." Zhao Lei said, "That's fine. What I want to say is, you might be a bit tired today, but I'm a bit happy, because you might not be Jingyang." Bai Zhao was silent for a while, then softly said, "If you really are a sword demon and have been banished from Aoyama, then I'll be even happier." These two sentences didn't have a head or a tail, so it was hard to understand. But Zhao Lei understood what she meant. If Jingjiu really was the reincarnation of Zhenren Jingyang, then Bai Zhao would give up on him, because there was no way to get close to him. If Jingjiu was a sword demon banished from Aoyama, then this girl with a firm Dao heart would approach him without hesitation. Just like Lu Shui, she didn't care who he was. What she cared about was who he was to her. After saying these two sentences, Bai Zhao withdrew his gaze and looked at Zhao Lei, saying, "When we were on the top of Shenhua Peak, you told me about traveling together. I didn't quite understand what you meant at that time, but now I do. I really envy you and admire you." She was the future head master of Zhongzhou School, the only daughter of Bai Zhenren, and the descendant of Bai Ren. Even if she wanted to travel with Jingjiu for a while, she couldn't do it. Zhao Lei felt sorry for her. She thought for a while and reached out her right hand to touch her head. She wasn't touching Ada, and she wasn't Jingjiu, so her action was a bit clumsy. Bai Zhao was slightly stunned, then smiled and said, "I'll come back to see you in a few years." Zhao Lei said, "You take care of yourself." The whole house was under the protection of the formation. The formation set up by Gu Qing could shelter them from wind and rain, isolate them from sight and breath, and keep the mountain in spring all the year round. But it couldn't stop the begonia petals from flowing into the house along with the stream. They made a dozen turns in the house and then flowed out. At the seventh turn, there was a folded corridor with eaves extending to the water. Here, one could listen to the rain, listen to the water, admire the flowers, and take a nap. Jingjiu lay on the bamboo chair, holding a grain of sand in his hand, thinking about where to put it on the porcelain plate. He hadn't played this game for many years, which meant that he had a rare leisure time at this time. Of course, it was also because he was a bit tired. Holding the seal of the king of the underworld and killing Uncle Tai Lu with one punch, he was a bit tired. But the real mental fatigue was dealing with so many people, especially Tai Ping Zhenren, who wrote the letter. "Bai Zhao is here." Zhao Lei walked up to him and said. Jingjiu didn't raise his head, but grunted in acknowledgement. "Back when she came to Aoyama to propose marriage, I thought she was very pitiful and wanted to touch her head, but I didn't think it was appropriate, so I just patted her shoulder." Zhao Lei said, "She was very happy today, but I thought she was even more pitiful, so I couldn't help but touch her head a few times." Jingjiu raised his head and glanced at her, asking, "How many times?" Zhao Lei thought about it and said, 3 times. "Don't learn from me," said Jingjiu. "You'll get into a lot of trouble." Zhao Lei knew he was in a bad mood. Even though he was just taking advantage of the situation, He was expelled from Aoyama after all. Who could be completely emotionless? I'm indeed a bit tired. Since the West Ocean, Lu Ci's choice has disappointed me. Jingju knew what she was thinking about and said, Yuan Qijing hasn't given me the great formation of Aoyama all these years. That's one of the reasons. The tiredness was the beginning of all this, or in other words, it made him start to think about how to deal with it. His big brother had succeeded in the immortalization, so he didn't want him to stay in Aoyama anymore. He took the initiative to leave to avoid the division of Aoyama, and killed senior Uncle Tai Lu to eliminate the biggest internal threat. Plus, Fang Jingtian had succeeded in the heavenly arrival realm. Now Aoyama sect was obviously safer than before, and they had more confidence to face the pressure from Zhongzhou school. As for himself, leaving was not a big deal. How could Aoyama not take care of people? Zhao Lei didn't say anything more. She sat down on the end of the bamboo chair and accompanied him quietly. Because of Nan Wang, Jingjiu's seclusion had become a well-known secret before it officially started. This was the first day he left Aoyama, but the yard outside Cloudy Town had already welcomed many guests, which was ridiculous. After Nan Wang, it was Lu Shisui, then Bai Zhao, then Sensei Kanyang, and Shuiyu Nunnery's Zheng Tao who came to visit together. They all represented the attitude of their respective sections. Just like Zhuoruzhui represented the attitude of Tianguang Peak and Liangwang Peak to some extent. It was said that Jingjiu was a sword devil, but what if he was the immortal Jingyang? Therefore, the Platonist sect, the Mirror sect, and Shuiyu Nunnery all sent junior disciples here, and they were all girls who knew Jingjiu. People like the sect master would never show up. Sensei, Kanyang, and Jing Tao were led to the corridor by Gu Qing. Looking at Jingjiu sitting on the bamboo chair, they felt a strong sense of strangeness and fear. They lowered their heads and dared not say a word. Even Sensei didn't have any of her usual arrogance. She was obedient like a fish that He Zhan had his eyes on. The immortal Jingyang was the immortal Jingyang. There was no need for any prefix, description, or explanation. Just the name alone was enough. He wasn't someone who could get close to him by acting coquettishly or shamelessly. Tell your master that I got it. You can go back now. Jingjiu turned to Kanyang, as if he wanted to say something. Gu Qing and the others knew that Kanyang was his disciple in the Mirror sect, so they wondered if he should keep her here. They didn't know that Jingjiu was thinking that Tong Yen was still in the Hermit Peaks. After the disturbance caused by Nan Wang, it was impossible to have a peaceful life here. Many sects had left their disciples in Cloudy Town to keep an eye on the fog. When they saw Sensei and the other two walk into the fog, and the Aoyama sect didn't stop them, they had a lot of ideas. Ozawa, Baotong Zen Temple, and a dozen other sects also sent their young disciples to visit after a short discussion. Jingjiu wouldn't meet everyone, so Gu Qing was the one who received them. He answered them skillfully, saying that he understood what they wanted and would convey their message to his master. Then he would send them away one by one like an assistant or a butler. After a few days, Gu Qing thought that it was about time, but he didn't expect that more and more cultivators came to Cloudy Town. In the foggy town, there were sadhus wearing conical hats, proud rogue cultivators, elders of small sects, and even a few people with neither righteous nor evil auras. The number of them was even more than that of ordinary people. The townspeople had sensed that something was wrong, so they all closed their doors and dared not come out. The courtyard was enshrouded in a thick fog. Ordinary people couldn't get close to it, and neither could cultivators. They couldn't even see the scenery dozens of feet away. They could only kneel or sit cross-legged outside the fog, waiting nervously for the person in the fog to summon them. There were also a few cultivators who considered themselves to be talented. They raised their hands and shouted at the thick mist, "I'm the genius of Gaoyang. If the immortal is willing to meet me, I might be able to see the true meaning of the sword art. If the immortal is willing to take me as his disciple, I will definitely carry forward the sword art of Aoyama. Immortal Jingyang, if you are really as powerful as the rumor says, why don't you just strike me to death with a thunderbolt? Chapter 585. It was getting colder and colder, and the fog was getting thicker and thicker. Occasionally it would snow. More and more cultivators came to Cloudy Town. Some of them were kneeling outside the fog and kowtowing, trying to become Jinren Jingyang's disciple. Some of them were standing at a distance, staring at the fog with a greedy look in their eyes. Some of them were cursing at the fog, shouting that they would avenge Jinren Jingyang and kill the sword demon. However, none of them dared to actually rush into the fog. Scenes that were either absurd or ridiculous played out outside Cloudy Town and were updated every day. The Aoyama sect didn't seem to know what was happening in Cloudy Town. They didn't care at all. As time went by, the cultivators confirmed Aoyama sect's attitude. They were no longer nervous. They walked around Cloudy Town as they pleased. They even harassed the residents a few times. The situation didn't improve until a certain day. An arrogant cultivator from the Celestial sect, who thought that he was talented and the future of the righteous path, often shouted things that were not pleasant to the ear, such as demons, or being struck by lightning. The fog was still quiet and ignored him. So he became even more reckless. He even broke into a restaurant in Cloudy Town. In the restaurant, after drinking a few jars of wine, the arrogant cultivator was about to do something even more outrageous. At that moment, the clouds in the sky rolled, and the fog on the street suddenly dispersed. A blood-red lightning struck down from the sky. The blood-red lightning accurately and magically passed through the roof of the restaurant and landed on the body of the arrogant cultivator from the Celestial sect in the private room. The arrogant cultivator from the Celestial sect didn't even have time to defend himself. He was blasted into pieces by the blood-red lightning. To be more precise, he wasn't blasted into pieces. He was only blasted into a dozen pieces of burnt flesh. The cuts on the flesh were very smooth. There was no blood at all. It was obvious that they were cut by a flying sword. In the cultivation world, this blood-red flying sword was very famous. It didn't regret its death, hence the name Thoughtless. That was perfected Jingyang's original sword, which now belonged to Aoyama sect's Shinma Peak sect master, Zhao Lei. Naturally, the madman from the Tianqing clan behaved himself, and so did the rest of the cultivators in Cloudy Town. The arrogant ones were rendered speechless, and they kowtowed even more sincerely, especially those cultivators who shouted that they wanted to kill the monster, and they even slipped away quietly. Cloudy Town regained its peace, and the residents went back to their normal lives. The shops selling steamed cakes and buns reopened, and the residents even dared to say a few words to those cultivation practitioners. The restaurant had also reopened. The aroma of the hot pot drifted far away along with the mist, attracting many cultivators who had nothing to do. The private room on the second floor facing the street had never been opened, no matter how high the price the cultivators offered. As for things like threats and intimidation, no one had forgotten that the mad disciple of the heaven-raising sect, who had been blasted into pieces by the blood-colored lightning, had died in this restaurant. Why has no one ever heard of that sword? Isn't the inherited heaven sword the chief sword of Aoyama? During the Battle of the West Ocean, many people knew that the inherited heaven sword was not a sword, but a sheath. It was said that the sheath was used to contain the all-in-one sword. Is that all-in-one sword really a heavenly treasure? Of course it is. If it is not a heavenly treasure, how could it have seized the spiritual soul of perfected Jingyang and reincarnated as a human? My fellow cultivator, please be careful. It was not the all-in-one sword that seized the spiritual soul of perfected Jingyang, but the perfected reincarnated with the help of the sword. Some of the cultivators in the restaurant had been here since the beginning, and some had arrived recently. Their discussions would always turn into arguments and even angry glares at each other, and the process kept repeating. By now, the cultivation world had basically confirmed that Jingjiu was the sword monster, because there was too much evidence, and he had never dared to take out the inherited heaven sword to prove it. Yet, the majority of the cultivation practitioners in Cloudy Town believed that the person in the fog was the reincarnation of the perfected Jingyang, or in other words, it was their wish. Taiping Jinren had asked Dapyao to say, "It is not a self-evident truth who you are." However, it was a self-evident truth who had the highest cultivation state in the cultivation world. The perfected Jingyang was the first person in Chaotian in 1,000 years. Even though he might fail in his ascension, he was still the first person in 1,000 years. This was the public opinion in the cultivation world for hundreds of years. The fake manor cave of the perfected Jingyang had attracted so many cultivation practitioners to take the risk to investigate it. The patch of fog might be the true body of the perfected Jingyang. Who wouldn't want to come and have a look? Even if they had no chance to meet him, it would be a great fortune to be able to see the patch of fog, be seen by the person in the fog, and absorb the same spiritual energy of heaven and earth at such a close distance. Nothing could stop the cultivation practitioners from pursuing the Tao. The perfected Jingyang was the Tao. Please take a seat, cultivation friends. I'll go back to Scenery Garden now. A monk of the Dongi Taoist sect put down the chopsticks in his hand and bowed to the cultivation practitioners around the restaurant before walking out of the restaurant. It had been a long time since the grand ceremony of Aoyama. The Aoyama sect didn't pay any attention to these cultivation practitioners in Cloudy Town, and nothing could be detected in the fog. Yet, the cultivation practitioners had no intention of leaving. This monk of the Dongi Taoist sect would wait outside the patch of thick fog every day, except when he ate his meals, showing no sign of impatience. There were many other cultivation practitioners like him, and they all thought that the perfected Jingyang was testing their willpower. Looking at the back of the monk heading toward the outside of the town, a middle-aged man who looked like a scholar said in a mocking tone, "They come here every day to eat meat and drink wine. I heard that they don't forbid marriage. I wonder how the masters of the Guoqing Temple can tolerate these deviant monks. They should expel them from the Zen sects as soon as possible." The rest of the cultivation practitioners merely smiled without replying. Some of them stood up and chased after the monk. The middle-aged scholar was taken aback for a moment, and then let out a self-mocking smile, saying, "Well, it's all right. I'll wait for another 100 days. Having said that, he put down a golden leaf and strode out of the restaurant. The rest of the cultivation practitioners smiled at each other and put down the golden leaves, saying that they would go together. The manager of the restaurant walked out from the back of the restaurant. He picked up the golden leaves on the tables one by one and put them into his bag casually. Then he picked up the soup pot and poured some white soup for the last table. After chatting with the customers for a while, he walked back to the back of the restaurant with a calm expression on his face. It seemed that he didn't realize that the money he had collected that day was equivalent to the annual income of a big restaurant in Zhaoga City. This manager is a regular person, but he is obviously not ordinary. It looks like this restaurant is not an ordinary place. The last table was occupied by a pair of master and his disciple. The older one was the elder of the mysterious heaven sect, Zhou Yunmu, and the younger one was the current sect master of the mysterious heaven sect, Lu Jin. I've heard a rumor that the senior master Zhao Leu likes eating hot pot very much. Lu Jin said, I've inquired about the name earlier. It's said that there is a large manor house in that patch of fog. The people thought that this should be the second garden of the immortal Jingyang, so they named it Scenery Garden. Looking at the street outside the restaurant, Zhou Yunmu said, Your master was fortunate enough to cultivate to the Yuanying state and see more sceneries. Your talent is similar to mine, and your temperament is much better than mine. I don't want you to stay in your current cultivation state, because the Yuanying state is not enough. Now that there is such an opportunity, I hope you won't miss it. I fought alongside Jingjiu, the senior master in the cultivation tournament of the plum meeting, but I was actually under his protection, and that was 32 years ago. Lu Jin was the most valued genius disciple of the mysterious heaven sect. He entered the cultivation tournament of the plum meeting with great difficulty, and was placed in the same group as Jingjiu. Since then, Jingjiu had become the brightest star of the young generation in the cultivation world, and later he became the immortal sect master of the Aoyama sect. Lu Jin would recall the past once in a while, feeling sentimental. As for whether he should pay a visit to Jingjiu, he didn't even dare think about it. In comparison to a huge sect like the Aoyama sect, the mysterious heaven sect was like an ant. The gap between the two sects was too large, and the mysterious heaven sect couldn't reach it. However, no one had expected such a change to occur. Jingjiu might be the reincarnation of the immortal Jingyang. Regardless of whether he was the immortal Jingyang or the sword devil, he had been expelled from Aoyama. Even though the possibility of him being the sword devil was still low, he was much closer to the human world. As such, he should consider paying a visit to Jingjiu. The so-called scenery garden couldn't be seen in the thick fog, it was only a figment of their imagination. The mountain stream flowed on the gentle slope. In the open space between the flowering trees, there were cultivators who were meditating with their eyes closed. There were also some cultivators who were practicing their Dao or sword technique. It was as lively as a market. Seeing this, Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin were both startled, wondering what was going on. The Flowing Water Three-Flower sect is the external sect of the No Mercy sect. Their sword styles are not bad, and this young man has a good talent, but does he think he can be chosen by the immortal Jingyang? What are you thinking about? The middle-aged scholar who had appeared in the restaurant earlier said with a mocking expression while looking at the young cultivation practitioner riding the sword in front of the fog. Is he just flying around like that to perform acrobatics? Hearing this person's harsh words, Lu Jin said with a smile, "Everyone who comes here has something to ask for. There's no need for you to act like this, cultivationist." The middle-aged scholar said with a sneer, "I don't want to ask for any secret method of the sword work, and I'm not greedy enough to be taken as a personal disciple by the immortal. It's just that someone in my family is sick, and the Guoqing temple can't cure him, so I have no choice but to come here." Someone in his family was sick. This statement sounded quite normal, but it was obviously not the case. Otherwise, why would he come here after asking the Guoqing temple for help? Lu Jin felt a bit sympathetic, and thought that since the illness couldn't be cured by the Guoqing temple, it must be very troublesome. Why would he come here to ask the immortal Jingyang for help? Zhou Yunmu said, "The immortal Jingyang is half a master to the Zen master, and as the saying goes, if you understand one method, you will understand all methods. So, he might have a way to cure the illness." The middle-aged scholar's countenance softened a bit as he remarked, "You're quite knowledgeable." "I'm Lu Jin of the mysterious heaven sect," said Lu Jin. The middle-aged scholar's expression changed slightly as he said, "Are you the sect leader of the mysterious heaven sect? Are you the senior Zhou Yunmu?" Upon hearing this, the cultivation practitioners in the surroundings looked at them in tandem, and then came over to greet them. The mysterious heaven sect was a small cultivation sect in the cultivation world, but it had two outstanding sect masters, Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin. A few years ago, Zhou Yunmu had become a swordsman in the Yuanying state, a rarely seen swordsman among the small cultivation sects and the free-traveling cultivation practitioners. Why did they come to Cloudy Town? As the cultivation practitioners were pondering over this question, a surprised scream burst out from somewhere. "The gate is open! Scenery Garden is open!" The thick fog hadn't dispersed yet, and Scenery Garden hadn't shown its true appearance, let alone opened the gate. They had waited for many days, and the day had finally come. Those cultivation practitioners didn't react immediately, standing on the same spots in a daze. A moment later, they came back to their senses. Their bodies trembled slightly, but they didn't dare take a step forward, standing on the same spots. Yuan Shu walked out from the courtyard and asked the crowd, "Where are the cultivation friends of the mysterious heaven sect?" Countless gazes fell on Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin. Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin were also startled, wondering what was going on. But they didn't dare delay. They strode to the front of the courtyard and bowed to Yuan Shu, indicating their identities. Yuan Shu reached out his right hand, motioning for them to follow him into the courtyard. The rest of the cultivation practitioners were in an uproar, thinking that even if Zhou Yunmu was a rare swordsman in the Yuanying state of a small cultivation sect, how could they be inferior to him? Some of them took a few steps forward reflexively, intending to talk to Yuan Shu. Yuan Shu didn't do anything, but shot a glance at these people indifferently. Though he didn't seem to exist on the Shima Peak, his gaze was as cold as the snow, showing a bit of the awe-inspiring aura of a granduncle. Those people were startled, not daring to take a single step forward. "Sect Master Lu!" A trembling shout suddenly broke out in the crowd. The middle-aged scholar took a few steps forward and knelt down on the ground with a thud, holding up a booklet that had been edited in good condition. The cold winter wind ruffled the booklet, exposing the old and new ink words. It was neither a magic method nor a list of treasures to be offered as offerings, but a medical record and a prescription. He didn't ask Lu Jin to bring him to Scenery Garden. All he wanted was to find a chance of survival for his family. Lu Jin was fully aware that it was a rare opportunity that day. If he annoyed the immortal masters of Aoyama in Scenery Garden, he would have a great regret. Yet, as his master Zhou Yunmu had said, he had an extraordinary temperament. Without thinking too much, he bowed to Yuan Shu. Yuan Shu nodded to indicate that it didn't matter. Lu Jin took the medical record from the middle-aged scholar's hand, and turned around to enter Scenery Garden. Seeing the front gate of Scenery Garden closed again, the middle-aged scholar's face turned pale, his lips quivering slightly. It was unclear whether he was nervous or expectant. It didn't take long before the front gate was opened again, and Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin walked out. The fog enshrouded the mountains and fields again, and Scenery Garden disappeared from the human world again. All the cultivation practitioners crowded around them, trying to establish a friendly relationship with this pair of master and disciple, asking them about the situation inside and what they had learned. Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin didn't answer them, nor did they slow down their steps. They walked straight to the front of the middle-aged scholar. Lu Jin returned the medical record to him and said while shaking his head, "I'm sorry. The immortal doesn't have any solution." Hearing this, the middle-aged scholar's face grew paler, as if he had been struck by a thunder. His body swayed and he almost fell down. "My condolences, my cultivationist," Lu Jin said to him sympathetically. The middle-aged scholar took the medical record with his trembling hand, and his knuckles turned white as he squeezed it. However, he didn't tear up the medical record in the end. It was unclear whether it was because he felt hopeless and helpless, or he didn't want to tear it up. A moment later, he calmed down and put away the medical record carefully, bowing to Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin to express his gratitude. After that, he bowed to Scenery Garden in the thick fog. Then, he turned around and walked toward the outside of the mountain. Chapter 586. The cultivation practitioners who came to Cloudy Town had their own purposes. That middle-aged scholar wanted to ask Jingjiu to cure his family member. Since he failed, he had to leave. His back view looked peaceful, but it was actually desolate. It seemed that he wouldn't come here again. It was unknown who was sick in his family, but he must have a deep affection for them, which was why he came here and left like this. Looking at the figure disappearing into the distance, the crowd felt sad and sympathetic. Yet, they were all cultivation practitioners, so this feeling soon disappeared. They continued to surround Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin, asking them what had happened in Scenery Garden. Zhou Yunmu didn't say anything. Lu Jin had no choice but to explain. The immortal didn't allow him to tell them, so he asked the cultivation friends to forgive him. The crowd had no choice but to get out of the way. Nobody noticed that after the figure of the master and the disciple disappeared in the clouds, a few cultivation practitioners left soundlessly after exchanging glances. The morning sunlight illuminated the muddy river, and the winter snow covered the rice fields. It was a beautiful scene. A few years ago, the sword light had wiped out all the demons in the muddy river in one night. The populace on both sides of the muddy river didn't need to worry about them anymore, and their lives were much better than before. As their lives became better, fewer people prayed to the gods and the Buddha, and the small mountain god temples in the countryside were gradually abandoned. There was an abandoned mountain god temple in this mountain. The old tiles were covered with snow, and the cold wind leaked out from the broken walls. It looked quite desolate. Lu Jin opened his eyes. After making sure that the magic pills had all been converted into Zhen Yuan and that his injury was not serious, he looked at the outside of the temple, feeling a bit worried. "There are no enemies within 10 miles, said Zhou Yunmu. "You should take a rest." Lu Jin said, "It's still far from the mountain gate. I don't know what will happen next." After they left Scenery Garden in Cloudy Town, they had encountered 3 groups of cultivation practitioners who tried to rob them. The first group of robbers were 3 free-traveling practitioners, followed by a few devil men of the deviant sects, and the last group of masked men were probably the orthodox swordsmen of the sect of 3. What these cultivation practitioners wanted to rob was not money, but something brought out by the master and the disciple from Scenery Garden. Everybody saw them enter Scenery Garden with their own eyes, so they all thought that they must have obtained something. Whether it was pills or cultivation methods, they were definitely good stuff. If Zhou Yunmu didn't have a high cultivation state, which was much higher than that of an elder of a small sect, and Lu Jin's methods were powerful enough, it would be hard for them to pass these trials. However, they did not let their guard down because they would gradually leave the Aoyama sect's territory after they passed the muddy river. Then, the truly powerful figures might strike. The snow on the roof of the mountain god temple suddenly trembled, then rustled down, piling up on the ground like a waterfall. Zhou Yunmu led Lu Jin out of the temple. Looking at the towering tree in the west, he said, "Cultivationist, please show yourself." Dozens of cold-resistant magpies flew out of the trees. At the same time, a gloomy voice came from the tree. "There's no need for that. I'm not interested in pills or cultivation methods. I just want to know what that person in Scenery Garden said to you." As the eerie voice spread in all directions, dozens of magpies fell to the ground and died. Hundreds of dead fish floated up in the muddy river at the foot of the cliff, and were soon washed downstream. Seeing this, Lu Jin's expression changed slightly. He knew that this deviant practitioner was very powerful, and he wondered if his master could defeat him. Yet, Zhou Yunmu was fully aware that this person's cultivation state was higher than his, so he said expressionlessly, "A swordsman like you actually showed up in the vicinity of Aoyama. Don't you fear death? This place is very far from Aoyama." The deviant swordsman hiding in the tree continued, "And why would the Aoyama sect care about the affairs of Cloudy Town? You are chosen by Scenery Garden. Maybe the Aoyama sect wants you dead. Most importantly, I just want to know what that person said to you. Is it a sin?" Looking at the tree, Lu Jin asked sharply, "What if we don't tell you?" The voice of the deviant swordsman grew even gloomier. "Then, it's a sin. I have no choice but to ask you to die." No sooner had he finished speaking than the corpses of the magpies on the cliff suddenly bounced up and exploded into dozens of bloody mists in the air. Dozens of black smokes came out from the bloody mists, carrying a pungent stench and murderous energy. Even the bright morning sunlight couldn't disperse them. The dozens of black smokes reached toward Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin as fast as lightning like rope. Lu Jin took a few steps forward, his gloomy face full of solemnity. Dozens of flames came out from his white Taoist robe, blocking the black smoke. Standing behind Lu Jin, Zhou Yunmu waved his hands in front of his body. A golden glow came out from his chest and abdomen, in which a small man could be vaguely seen. Along with a sizzling sound, the flames were extinguished instantly. The most powerful magic method of the mysterious Heaven sect could only block the opponent for a moment. However, it was during this moment that Zhou Yunmu had finished setting up the magic method. He sprinkled the golden glows with his yuanying state, which started to compete with the black smoke. The scorched smell could be sensed everywhere on the cliff. The dilapidated mountain god temple had turned into ruins noiselessly during the competition between the two swordsmen. The black smokes full of murderous energy and bloody intent were devouring the golden glows at a visible speed, getting closer to Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin. It seemed that they would be swallowed by the black smokes in a few seconds. "You take the stuff and leave first," Zhou Yunmu said calmly, no fear visible in his eyes. Lu Jin knew that his master intended to sacrifice his yuanying to kill the opponent. Even if he couldn't do it, he had to buy some time for himself. Shocked, he was about to leave without hesitation. All of a sudden, a pale blue sword light flew over from behind the ruins of the mountain god temple. It brushed past Lu Jin's body and pierced into the patch of black smokes. This pale blue sword light was evidently extraordinary. Its sword will was formidable, but it was also extremely mild. As it combined with the magic method of Zhou Yunmu, it blocked the black smokes immediately. The incomer had a high cultivation state, though he was not as powerful as the deviant devil man in the big tree. His cultivation state was almost the same as Zhou Yunmu's. The deviant devil man was certain that the incomer was a disciple of Aoyama in the free travel state. He couldn't help but feel shocked, wondering how Aoyama could arrive so quickly if it was located far away from here. Though the disciple of Aoyama in the free travel state was not his match, he didn't dare stay any longer. He put away the demonic treasure and was about to leave by breaking through the sky. It was then that the sky above the big tree was broken. More than a dozen cold and domineering sword lights descended from the sky. The swordsmen had different cultivation states. Some were in the free travel state, and some were in the undefeated state, but none of them was a match for the deviant swordsman. However, when these dozen sword lights combined, they displayed an unimaginably powerful force. The sword formation of Aoyama. The deviant swordsman let out a despairing and unreconciled cry. Countless sword sounds broke out. The towering tree disappeared. The broken leaves, the bare branches, and the bird nests among the branches had all been broken into pieces, forming a grave several feet high on the ground. The corpse of the deviant swordsman and the demonic infant had also been broken into pieces, scattering in the grave, unable to be put together again. A dozen disciples of Aoyama landed on the cliff. Zhou Yunmu expressed his gratitude to the group and introduced himself. The disciple of Aoyama who had struck first said with a mild expression and an extraordinary bearing, "I'm Guananshan of Liangwang Peak." Guananshan was the principal disciple of Aoyama and had a high reputation in the cultivation circle. Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin of course knew him, so they greeted him again. Looking at Zhou Yunmu, Guananshan fell silent for a while. But he didn't ask anything in the end, saying, "The road ahead is long. Take care of yourselves, you two cultivation friends." Zhou Yunmu knew what Jingjiu wanted to ask, and also understood why those disciples of Aoyama looked at him with a strange expression. "I won't see you off," he said with a faint smile. The muddy river kept flowing eastward as usual, as if it hadn't seen the previous scene. Of course, it was possible that it had seen it many times. Looking at the two figures disappearing in the distance, Guananshan remarked, "It's not easy for such a small sect to have two swordsmen in the Yuan-ing state." Gu Han said, "Maybe they have been in contact with the other side for a long time." Guananshan turned to the south, remaining silent. Cloudy Town was right there. With the departure of Jingjiu, the decree of the sect master was ignored. As a result, the disciples of Liangwang Peak didn't have to wait until they entered the broken sea state to get out of the mountains. In the last few days, the disciples of Liangwang Peak had been patrolling in the south like before. Intentionally or unintentionally, Guananshan had paid more attention to the area between Nanhazu and the Muddy River. It was the same as before. Cloudy Town was right there. Gu Han of course understood what his big brother meant. Looking at the invisible town in the distance, he said angrily, "You made it known to the whole world. Is it a hermit?" Enshrouded by the clouds and fog, the mountain stream and flowering trees looked like a fairyland, but the manor house was nowhere to be seen. The flowering trees were disturbed by the wind, and the water in the stream rippled. Zhuoruzhui returned to the courtyard by stepping on the swallowing boat sword. He said to Zhao Leu, "It's all right there. Next, they will head north from the Muddy River. As long as they don't cross Yu County, there should be no problem. I've informed Su Zai." Zhao Leu didn't know what Jingzhou had told the master and disciple, but she said, "Good." Gu Qing said, "The curtain rollers have found out the result of their investigation. That middle-aged scholar is called Qing Ruqing, who used to study in Yamatsai for a few years. Later, he and his wife entered the Dongi Taoist sect for some unknown reason and tried to practice karma mudra with each other. But something went wrong. His wife became seriously ill and couldn't be cured. This person has nothing to do with Taiping." "Did the couple have a good relationship?" asked Zhao Lei. Gu Qing uttered After a moment of silence he said, "His wife is a regular person." All the people in the courtyard fell silent. When a cultivation practitioner married a mortal, there would be a problem that couldn't be solved. No matter how good the relationship between the two of them was, they couldn't grow old together. That middle-aged scholar left Yamatsai and took his wife to practice the secret method of the Dongi Taoist sect because he was reluctant to part with her. "Does Senior Grandmaster know about this?" asked Zhuoruzhui. Zhao Leu said, "He should have figured it out when he saw the medical case." Zhuoruzhui said, "It will be the new year in a few days. What should we do? Should we ask him if he wants to eat the manatee meat of Penglai Island?" Zhao Lei said, "He has been in a bad mood lately. Don't bother him." Zhuoruzhui was puzzled, thinking that Jingzhou had been lying on the bamboo chair in a daze every day, as expressionless as before. How could she tell that he was in a bad mood? Chapter 587. Jingzhou's mood was as real as his own, and it was hard to tell what he was feeling. He was used to being expressionless, and he didn't have any hobbies. He would play with the sand in the ceramic plate once in a while, and it didn't mean anything when he didn't play with it. However, Zhao Lei was aware that he was in a bad mood. She had developed this ability after living with him for many years, and it was also a talent. On New Year's Eve, they left Scenery Garden after having a hot pot dinner. Zhuoruzhui, Gu Qing, and Yuan Chu continued their cultivation as if it were a normal day. Zhao Lei knelt before Jingzhou and hugged him, as she had done in the past. Jingzhou patted her back gently. Zhao Lei said, "I started reading the Taoist canon when I was 6 years old, and I knew that there would always be farewells in life. I thought I had gotten used to it, but I was still touched by it." She was referring to the matter between the middle-aged scholar and his mortal wife. Jingzhou said, "It's a good thing to get used to it, but it's hard to get used to the bad things. It's just that you are numb to it and then you don't want to think about it anymore." Zhao Lei looked at Jingzhou with her black and white eyes wide open, asking seriously, "Is that the only thing you can do?" Jingzhou said, "I had a very good friend when I was young. I saw him grow old, get sick, and enter the grave with my own eyes, but I couldn't do anything about it." Zhao Lei pressed, "And then?" "The story itself is meaningless because he is already dead." Jingzhou said, "What I want to say is that this matter has made me think every day about how to stay together. One wouldn't think about it if they were numb to it. As long as they thought about it, they wouldn't be numb, even though it would be very painful. Zhao Liu said, "So you saw that pair of master and disciple, and read those medical records?" Jingju said, "I hope everyone in the world can live a few more years." Life and death were the true farewells. Lu Xi had left. That person in Zhaoga City would leave soon. Yuan Qijing would leave in a few years. Those idiots outside Scenery Garden and those idiots in Scenery Garden would leave one day. Jingju didn't like crowds, but he hated parting even more. Zhao Leia looked into his eyes and said very seriously, "I don't want to leave you either. Promise me." Jingju looked at her and said, "Cultivate well. Live for at least another few thousand years, and then strive to live for tens of thousands of years. As long as you can live, live forever." If this was a conversation between lovers, the second half of the sentence should be, "Please don't leave me," but he would not say that. No matter how strong their relationship was, when the boss left one after the other, even if they left together, they would still be separated. Only when they were alive would they not be truly separated. Even if they were at opposite ends of the universe, separated by a distance that could never be crossed, as long as they knew that the other was still alive, they would be together. That middle-aged scholar and his wife probably wanted to do the same. The stars in the sky shone on the courtyard, the eaves, the running water, and Zhao Leia's eyes, making them sparkle. She looked at Jingzhou and said earnestly, "I will." Ada landed under the eaves under the starlight. Seeing the strange atmosphere between the couple, he walked to Jingzhou and crouched on his knees after a moment of hesitation. Jingzhou rubbed his back and said, "You can live for many more years. Don't be afraid." Ada sighed, thinking that even if he could live for another few thousand years, it would be nothing but a fleeting wave in comparison to eternity. It would be meaningless. Note: Zhao Leia knew that Jingzhou was in a bad mood, and she also knew why he was in a bad mood, but the other three people in Scenery Garden didn't know. Zhuoruzhui stopped thinking about it after a short while, but Gu Qing and Yuan Chu discussed with each other for a long time and came up with some ideas, so they sent the news to the outside of Scenery Garden. In their eyes, Jingzhou left Aoyama for peace and quiet, but now Cloudy Town was full of people and cultivation practitioners were everywhere in the mountains and fields outside the fog. Some cultivation practitioners kept kowtowing, dyeing the stream red. Some cultivation practitioners kept playing with their swords, scaring away the birds in the forest. How could Jingzhou be happy? Soon, the cultivation world learned that the master and his disciple, the only ones who had ever entered Scenery Garden, had returned to the mysterious Heaven sect. It was said that the remaining deviant sects had set their eyes on this small sect, but they were wiped out before they could do anything. And it was not the Aoyama sect that did it, but another mysterious deviant sect. After that, the mysterious Heaven sect began to seal their mountains. It was obvious that they needed time to digest the benefits they had gained in Scenery Garden, which stimulated the cultivation world again. As the spring deepened, more and more cultivation practitioners came to Cloudy Town. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu became more and more worried about Jingzhou's mood, so they sent the news to the outside of Scenery Garden for the second time. It was the most beautiful day of spring. Thousands of flowers were in full bloom, and the fog flowed away like clouds. The scenery outside Cloudy Town was breathtaking. Suddenly, snow fell from the sky. The snow was not heavy, and it did not feel particularly cold. It was not even the coldness of late spring. The ordinary residents of the town did not feel bitter, but found it interesting. However, those cultivation practitioners found something wrong. The snowflakes that ordinary people were not afraid of were as scary as ice blades when they fell on them. Even though they used Taoist magic to protect themselves, their clothes were still cut by the snowflakes, and the coldness went straight into their meridians. Some cultivation practitioners wanted to take the opportunity to show their perseverance and create a scene similar to the snow outside Scenery Gate, but they were almost frozen to death by the overnight snow. It was not until then that someone figured out what was going on. It was not the salt-like spring snow, but the wrath of the sword justice of Aoyama. How many people in the cultivation world could withstand the wrath of Yuan Qijing? The cultivation practitioners immediately scattered like birds and beasts. Most of them returned to their hometowns, not daring to step into Cloudy Town again. There were a dozen cultivation practitioners who were very brave, but they only dared to stay in Cloudy Town, not daring to take a look at the fog again. Scenery Garden finally quieted down. The disciples of Liangwang Peak didn't have to patrol around all day long to hunt down the evil demons of the deviant sects, so they had some leisure time. Like Gu Han and the other disciples of Liangwang Peak, some elders of Aoyama also had some resentment about this matter, and some were even more resentful. So did the sects such as the Kunlun sect. The cultivation practitioners of small sects and individual practitioners went to Cloudy Town to worship the so-called Scenery Garden, which made them very angry. It was a sword devil who lived there, not the immortal Jingyang. In the end, their resentment and anger had turned into dissatisfaction toward the Guoqing temple. If Zen Master hadn't stepped forward during the grand ceremony of Aoyama, Jingjiu would have died on the spot. Even if Yuan Qijing forgave Jingjiu and allowed him to leave Aoyama, he could only hide in Chaotian like a stray dog and evade the pursuit. It was impossible for him to act so arrogantly and cause so much trouble. In the late spring, the Guoqing temple welcomed a distinguished guest. The scripture-preaching master brewed the tea himself and left after bringing the tea into the room, leaving the meditation room to Zen Master and the distinguished guest. The old man in gray clothing had an ordinary appearance and a dull temperament. The only special feature was that his forehead was very broad, as if it could contain the ocean or even heaven and earth. "Is the immortal here to denounce me?" Zen Master said this to the old man in gray clothing with a smile, his two bare feet under his buttocks moving slightly. Both his smile and his restless thumbs indicated that he was a bit nervous at the moment. How many people in Chaotian could make the young Zen Master feel nervous, or in other words, so cautious? "Zen Master, don't mention it. I just came back from Penglai and passed by the East Ocean, so I came here to chat with you." "How is the chief monk doing lately?" The old man in gray clothing spoke slowly, and his tone was not obvious. Yet, he gave off a trustworthy feeling. Zen Master stopped smiling and said sadly, "It's difficult for the chief monk to come out from behind closed doors. All I hope is that he can have a peaceful escape in the end." After a moment of silence, the old man in gray clothing said, "The old chief monk has a profound understanding of the Buddhist methods. I'm sure he will leave in a good mood." Zen Master raised his teacup and said, "Thank you for your kind words." The old man in gray clothing continued, "I've been behind closed doors since the turmoil in the fiend prison. It's indeed inappropriate for the unicorn to come out of the mountains and make a scene in the Guoqing temple. However, he is the divine guardian animal, and no sect rules can control him. Besides, his spiritual body has suffered a serious injury, so it's better to let it go." Zen Master put down the teacup, a faint smile on the corners of his mouth as he said, "The immortal Tan's way of letting it go is rather gentle." It turned out that this old man in gray clothing was the immortal Tan, the sect master of the Zhongzhou school. It was said that Bai Zhenren was the actual manager of the Zhongzhou school, but she was not the sect master. After Lu Ci's departure, the immortal Tan was the #1 swordsman in Chaotian in name only. It was the same in all aspects, including his cultivation state and status. Of course, the person in Scenery Garden was not included. Zen Master continued, "A third of the back temple was destroyed. It was repaired after half of the gold in the palace treasury was transferred from Zhaoga City. The gold was quite heavy." The immortal Tan said, "It should be the fault of Taiping Zhenren of the Oyama sect." Zen Master waved his hand to indicate that it was no longer necessary to mention this matter, asking, "Immortal, why do you want to see me?" The immortal Tan said honestly, I want to hear the truth from you, whether he is the senior Jingyang or that devil sword. In their cultivation state, many details and so-called evidence were meaningless. Zen master stared at his eyes in silence, saying, as long as he has inherited all the karma of the immortal Jingyang, he is the immortal Jingyang. Jingjiu had said on the top of Tianguang Peak that he was the direction of all his karma. What Zen master said was not the same as what Tong Yen had said, but they were somehow related. They were the same as the snow on the high mountain and the water in Ozawa. If Zen master knew the conversation between Yuan Qijing and the dead dog in the sword jail, he would find that the two of them had the same opinion. After some thought, the immortal Tan said, I'm how I want the world to view me. The person in the mirror is the outsider. Zen master couldn't help praising him. The immortal Tan continued, but Taiping Zhenren won't let him return to Oyama, and Yuan Qijing won't live forever. The day Yuan Qijing died was the day Jingjiu would die. Zen master said, it's not easy to kill him. The immortal Tan said, when the heavenly sword becomes a devil, he will have a lot of advantages in the early stage of cultivation, but it's extremely difficult for him to reach the heavenly arrival state, because the spiritual energy of heaven and earth is not enough. In the current cultivation circle, the person who understood Jingjiu's cultivation the best was not Zhao Leiyu, because her cultivation state was not high enough. It was Ada. Ada had seen Jingjiu guiding the heavenly thunders for cultivation a few times, and he had expressed his concern at the time. The immortal Tan hadn't even seen Jingjiu before, but he had pointed out Jingjiu's biggest concern. Zen master fell silent, because he knew that what the immortal Tan said was probably correct. Scenery Garden outside Cloudy Town seemed to be on the verge of becoming a holy land for the cultivation circle, but what if Yuan Qijing died? Would Fang Jingtian let him go? By then, Jingjiu and those around him would have no choice but to die. Or, they would have to leave Aoyama for real. Zen master asked, what's the point of telling me all this, immortal? The immortal Tan said, I'd like to ask Zen master to write a letter for me. The expression on Zen master's face changed slightly as he asked, a letter? The immortal Tan said, I'd like to go to Cloudy Town in person, but I'm worried that I won't be able to win that person's trust. As such, I have no choice but to get a letter from you first. Note: when I wrote about Ada lamenting the waves, I thought of a sentence that Yi Luyun once said in the Qing Yu Year. My earliest idea should have come from Matsuo Basho's words, but I have long forgotten it. That sentence was, the waves only bloom for a while, but it is no different from 1,000-year stone. It is the same for Luyun. They are both talking about the waves, but the meaning expressed in the two books, separated by 12 years, is the opposite. Now it does not seem too artistic and ignores life and death, but it is actually a problem of logic. The life of the waves and the 1,000-year stone are both limited. In the long river of time, they are actually both waves. As for the question of Jingjiu's true identity, this large part of the plot temporarily stopped here. This was one of the 3 points that I wanted to write about when I wrote about the Chaotian Dao. I was very happy to write about it, and I was also looking forward to the world after my ascension. As for Jingjiu's true identity, whether it's Jingyang or all in one, I naturally have my own answer. However, based on the current plot, there's actually no way to prove it. We can only rely on your own judgment. However, I've always been honest when I write books. I'll write a definite answer for everyone as soon as possible. Chapter 588. Zen Master looked at him in silence and said, if the immortal went to Cloudy Town, the Aoyama sect would be very nervous, and the human world would not be a pleasant place. The immortal Tan said nonchalantly, I want to go there for the sake of the pleasant human world. After a moment of silence, Zen Master said, I can probably guess what you are going to do. I'm surprised and impressed, so I'll write the letter to you. Thank you, said the immortal Tan. It didn't take long before he received the letter and left the Guoqing temple. The escape method of heaven and earth at the Zhongzhou school was unparalleled in the world. Given his extraordinary cultivation state, he had no need to ride the cloud boat, so he could travel there by treading on the air. The fields in spring looked green and pleasant, but they didn't provide a sense of security due to the abundance of food. The carriages were still parked on both sides of the official road outside the Guoqing temple, and the sheds could be seen everywhere. Many porridge stalls could be seen in the distance. This was the tradition of Machio. The governor of Machio and the wealthy households in the county would ensure the food supply during this period. Standing in the sky, the immortal Tan looked down at the scene below and the smoke coming out from the porridge stalls, thinking that the human world should be so beautiful. No matter how good the escape method was, the big figures in heaven and earth couldn't be invisible, at least not when they were close to the great formation of Aoyama. Two powerful and exceedingly formidable sword lights flew over from the deep part of Aoyama one after another. Fang Jingtian and Zhenren, who had just returned from the West Ocean, guarded the two sides of the sky at a distance of 200 miles. A wind and snow approached at an unimaginable speed. The 3-foot sword came out from the wind and snow. Standing on the sword, Yuan Qijing looked toward the east. The 3 strongest swordsmen of Aoyama all came out to greet him, but they didn't do it to welcome him or to show their respect. The clouds in the sky dispersed, revealing the figure of the immortal Tan. Yuan Qijing said expressionlessly, "The immortal Tan came here uninvited. Do you intend to wage a war against Aoyama?" "This place is not Aoyama, though it's a bit close," said the immortal Tan. "Being close is the problem," said Yuan Qijing. The immortal Tan said, "Zhaoga City is very close to the Cloud Dream Mountain, but you people have never asked for my permission to go to Zhaoga City." After a moment of silence, Yuan Qijing asked, "What brings you here, immortal?" "To see someone," said the immortal Tan. The immortal Tan landed in Cloudy Town and went to that restaurant to eat the famous hot pot. He didn't taste anything outside the pot, nor did he feel anything, so he got up and walked out of the town. There was a path outside the town that led to the cliff that was shrouded in clouds all year round. Many cultivators had already left. Those with the strongest willpower did not dare to get close to the cloud because of Aoyama Sek's warning. They only dared to look at it from afar in the town. Seeing the immortal Tan heading toward the clouds and fog, the cultivation practitioners wondered if this old man in gray clothing was an idiot. The thickness of the fog was uneven, just like the color of the flowers and the koi in the stream. The immortal Tan didn't stop for even a moment under such a beautiful scenery. He kept on walking toward the inside of the fog. The fog dispersed gradually, and the flowers and trees swayed slightly in the wind. Some of the koi fled in fear, but more of them moved along with his footsteps like his followers. He saw a courtyard as he went upstream of the stream. Seeing the scene, the cultivation practitioners in the town were stunned speechless. What shocked them even more was that the front gate of the courtyard was opened. After the pair of master and disciple of the mysterious heaven sect, Scenery Garden had another guest, and Zhao Leu and the others came out to welcome him in person. Who was this old man in gray clothing? The scenery in the courtyard was even more beautiful, but it was far less pleasing to the eyes of the immortal Tan than the few young people by his side. In his eyes, Zhao Leu and Zhuoruzhui were the most beautiful things in the world. They were the future of Aoyama sect, but they were also the future of Chaotian. If they could become the future of Zhongzhou school, wouldn't it be the most wonderful thing in the world? Zhao Leu and the others didn't know what was on the immortal Tan's mind, but they felt the expression in this important figure's eyes was a bit strange, as if he was facing a formidable enemy. What did the immortal sect master of Zhongzhou school intend to do by coming to Cloudy Town in person, given his high status? Even Jing Jiu showed enough respect to the immortal Tan, to say nothing of these young disciples of Aoyama. He stood up from the bamboo chair ahead of time. The immortal Tan handed the letter from Zen Master to him, and said straightforwardly, "I'm here to propose a marriage." It was evident that he intended to act more amiable, like an old father who wished for his daughter's happiness. But he couldn't smile due to his dull temperament, so the expression on his face was a bit odd. The expressions on Zhuoruzhui, Gu Qing and Yuan Chu's faces grew even more odd, as if they had just swallowed 3,000 swords. Then they glanced at Zhao Lei reflexively. Zhao Lei's reaction was beyond everyone's expectation, as she asked straightforwardly, "What is the condition?" The immortal Tan glanced at her appreciatively, and said to Jingjiu, "If you come over, I'll marry little Zhao to you and give you the position of the sect master." After some thought, Zhao Lei said to Jingjiu, "I think it's a good idea." The immortal Tan wanted Jingjiu to go to Cloud Dream Mountain to be the sect master of Zhongzhou School. It was not a marriage proposal at all, but an attempt to snatch the disciple from Aoyama, and such a condition had never happened in the history of the cultivation circle. The Zhongzhou School had demonstrated its sincerity and determination. If it were any other cultivation practitioners, they would agree even if they didn't faint out of happiness, or at least think about it carefully. Yet, Jingjiu refused without a second thought, saying, "I'm the sect master of Aoyama. Thank you." This was indeed a good reason. The sect master of Aoyama was not inferior to the sect master of Center Sect. Why would he go to Aoyama? The problem was, besides himself, who else would think that he was still the sect master of Aoyama? Taiping Jinren will find a way to kill you, and those people in Aoyama won't want you to live either. The immortal Tan went on, "And you have a problem in your cultivation, which is hard to solve. What will you do after Yuan Qijing leaves?" Upon hearing this, Zhao Lei and the others looked at Jingjiu, feeling worried. The immortal Tan was the most outstanding figure in the cultivation circle in Chaotian. If he said that Jingjiu had a problem in his cultivation, it must be true. "If you agree to my proposal, we can provide you with a fairy book, which should be enough for you." The immortal Tan continued, "Of course, it won't be the fairy book you obtained at the Dao competition." "I'm fine right now," said Jingjiu without any hesitation. The immortal Tan said, "I'm not talking about the current situation. If you change your mind later, you can tell me at any time." Having said that, he left the courtyard and leaped to the high sky by stepping on the flowering tree lightly. Standing in the cloud, he nodded in the direction of Aoyama, and turned to head north. Soon, he had become a dark speck in heaven and earth. The wind and snow in the high sky had gradually disappeared. Yuan Qijing returned to Shangda Peak on the 3-foot sword. Fang Jingtian and Guangyuan Jinren met at a spot. They felt relieved when they saw the dark speck disappear. "You come and go as you please. Do you really regard our Aoyama as nothing?" "I'll go over there to have a look," said Fang Jingtian. Guangyuan Jinren reminded him, "Cloudy Town is a forbidden place for the peak masters." Fang Jingtian said, "The sect master of Zhongzhou School has come to Aoyama to meet that devil. Shouldn't we be wary of him?" The immortal Guangyuan stared into his eyes and said, "Big Brother said that nobody is allowed to touch that place." Fang Jingtian said with a nonchalant expression in his eyes, his silvery eyebrows ruffling slightly, "The white ghost is over there. Can I touch him?" Guangyuan Jinren sighed, thinking that even if Big Brother couldn't touch Jingjiu, he could at least touch someone else. The immortal Tan came. Then he left. He had spoken only a few words. The words included a marriage proposal, Taiping Jinren, and the sect master of Zhongzhou School. The shocking thunder was always hidden in such a mundane routine. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu didn't respond for a long time. The immortal Tan is indeed the sect master of Zhongzhou School, but the whole of Chaotian knows that the Bai family has the final say on Cloud Dream Mountain. Zhuoruzhui said, "I think the immortal Tan doesn't want the Zhongzhou School to be owned by the Bai family forever, That's why he came here to use Grandmaster to break the deadlock. Zhao Lei said after a moment of hesitation, I think this is Bai Zhao's idea. She was fully aware that that feeble woman had a deep affection for Jingjiu even though she appeared nonchalant. Regardless of the hidden scheme in the invitation of the immortal Tan, Bai Zhao must have calculated it for Jingjiu. Jingjiu didn't want to get involved in this matter, so he didn't calculate it. Seeing that they were so attentive, he said, Go ask Tong Yen. Tong Yen was the one who knew the internal situation of Zhongzhou School the best. Bring that child from the underworld out. See if he wants to come out after asking Tong Yen. Jingjiu said to Yuan Chu. Yuan Chu uttered, yes, in assent. Then he thought of another matter, asking, Young brother is still on the sword peak. Should we inform him? Let's wait for him to wake up by himself, said Jingjiu. Guqing said, I have something to take care of here as well. I need to go out and take care of it. Jingjiu knew what he meant, saying, I'll come back as soon as I'm done. The formation of Scenery Garden was arranged by Jingjiu and implemented by Guqing himself. The immortal Tan could ignore it, but it would be troublesome for them to go out by themselves. As they came to a green rock by the stream, Guqing was about to dismantle the formation. Can you take care of it by yourself? Zhao Lei suddenly asked. Guqing had no intention of concealing it in front of her. It might be troublesome, he said worriedly. Zhao Lei turned to Zhuoruzhui and said, You go and help him. Zhuoruzhui was aware that it was a troublesome matter, so he said unwillingly, Why? I'm a disciple of Tianguang Peak, not a member of Shenma Peak. You're a member of Scenery Garden now, said Zhao Lei. The immortal Tan said that he didn't want to talk about the current matter, which meant that he was fully aware that Scenery Garden couldn't exist as peacefully as it was now. This was the prophecy. The future always came faster than anyone could imagine. A storm came without any warning. The Aoyama sect had gradually calmed down after the initial panic. Yuan Qijing was in charge of the sect rules and regulations as usual in Shangda Peak. The rules set by Jingjiu had been largely modified by Fang Jingtian. The disciples of Liangwang Peak could enter and leave Aoyama at will. Jian Ryun and those young disciples who had opposed Jingjiu's appointment as the sect master of Aoyama were released from the sword jail. However, Bai Rujing's arms were broken and his meridians were sealed by the will of the thoughtless sword, unable to be healed. As a result, he became a useless person. Those clans with connections to Shenma Peak, like the Gu clan and the Precious Tree House, were the most affected. After leaving Cloudy Town, Guqing and Zhuoruzhui rode their swords to Nanzhou and landed on the top floor of the Yellow Building in Chaonan City. Kneeling before the two of them, the boss of the Precious Tree House told them what had happened in the last 10 days as quickly as he could. According to the agreement between Jingjiu and Ada, the Precious Tree House would be shared equally between Shenma Peak and Bihu Peak. Of course, Bihu Peak would only get the dividends and profits, but had no say in the matter. After the group of Shenma Peak left Aoyama, Bihu Peak didn't make any trouble. Instead, the other peaks made a clear request that all the products of the Precious Tree House and the precious medicines and treasures collected from the outside world were not allowed to be handed over to Shenma Peak. They had to be distributed among the 9 peaks. The shares of each peak will be determined tomorrow, which is also the deadline set by the mountain for me. In less than 10 days, the boss of the Precious Tree House had become so thin that he was almost out of shape. I have no choice but to die, he said in a hoarse voice. Chapter 589. There were many roads leading to Aoyama. However, for the families and businesses attached to Aoyama, they would die if they didn't agree to Aoyama sect's request. It was impossible for him to agree to the request of the Green Mountain sect. If he did so, the people in Scenery Garden would also sentence him to death. Guqing might be able to understand his difficulties if he were alone, but he had served Zhao Lei before, so he knew very well how formidable that young peak master was. Now, it was up to Shima Peak to help him get through this. Gu Qing knew that the share to be determined tomorrow was actually the distribution of resources to those external families of Aoyama sect. He had to support the precious treehouse, because one of those external families had the surname Gu. Many families earned unimaginable wealth by transporting various resources to Aoyama. In the past hundreds of years, the Fong family had the highest status and made the most money. The Yuan family of Lelong Commandery was in charge of sea treasures and had a good relationship with Peng Lai. However, they never got involved in the business of Tianan land. As for the Lu family, no one had ever heard of it. The Gu family was the most prosperous family in recent years, so they were under the most pressure. The external families of Aoyama were not outsiders, and the guests were not just random people. All the heads of the families were present, and the lowest position was at least a third-generation minister of offerings. Therefore, they all knew each other. However, the atmosphere was so tense that no greetings could be heard in the quiet hall. Only occasional whispers could be heard. Is that Ma Shixiang from Qingxiang? Hasn't the Ma family been abolished for a long time? As long as they're alive, they won't be abolished. Immortal Master Ma Hua is the brain of Liangwang Peak after all, and his position is not low. Don't you see that the Jian family has come out of the mountain again? Immortal Master Jian has been released from the sword jail. It's said that he is valued by the Yunqing Peak Master. 3,000 years of turbid water changes the way. It's really hard to predict what will happen in the world. The Gu family has been prosperous for so many years, but it's still uncomfortable to think that it will be replaced by the Ma family and the Jian family. Be it the past or present, the Ma family and the Jian family were the most inconspicuous existences among the outer families in Aoyama. Now that they were about to receive a huge amount of benefits, it was only natural that many families were dissatisfied. But thinking about the situation in Aoyama for the past half a year, even if there were immortal masters in Aoyama, none of them were willing to stand out and say anything. As the curtain moved slightly, Yu Siluo of Liangwang Peak walked in with several fellow disciples. The patriarchs and consecrators of the various clans hurriedly stood up and bowed respectfully. Yu Siluo smiled and gestured for the clan leaders to skip the formalities and return to their seat. Then, he walked up to the stage. On the auction platform on the first floor of the precious treehouse, there was a folding screen. Behind the folding screen was a table and a chair. It was the main seat specially prepared for the immortal master of Aoyama. Ma Hua didn't go over. He stood in the corridor and looked at a private room to the side. He squinted his eyes and smiled. The Gu clan leader bowed and maintained his posture. Not to mention returning to his seat, he didn't even dare to straighten his body. He looked extremely pitiful. Jian Ruyun looked at the Gu clan leader expressionlessly. He didn't say anything or ask the Gu clan leader to stand up. It seemed that he would let the Gu clan leader keep bowing like this. The Gu clan leader's face grew paler and paler as he thought of the Gu clan leader's precarious situation. He was on the verge of collapsing. The expression in Jian Ruyun's eyes grew colder as he looked at the Gu clan leader. The Jian clan and the Ma clan had been suppressed by the Gu clan over the past few years. Though they weren't completely ruined, they were in an extremely miserable state. Ma Hua said with a smile, "Those who deserve to die, you can arrange for their own deaths when you go back. Do you want to dirty our hands?" Upon hearing this, Yu Siluo stopped and turned around to take a look, but he didn't say anything. The Gu clan leader lowered his head even more, saying, "Things haven't been going well in our clan these days. 7 people have already left. I heard that the Immortal Master and young Master Han have a good relationship. Please have mercy on us." Ma Hua reached out his hand and patted his shoulder, saying, "These are the wishes of the Masters. Big Brother Gu and I can't say anything about it. I'm advising you to die for your own good. It's better to die than to make the Masters angry." The Gu clan leader's head was almost lowered to the ground, but he didn't say anything this time. It was because he couldn't respond to this kind of thing, nor could he resist it. The Gu clan was an outstanding clan in the mortal world. They had many servants, including free-traveling practitioners and retired caretakers from Aoyama, but they still didn't have the right to negotiate with Ma Hua. Ma Hua was merely a regular disciple of Liangwang Peak, but he represented the will of some important figures in Aoyama. I wonder which master has such a bad temper. A calm and mild voice burst out from a corner of the lobby. Hearing this voice, the Gu clan leader straightened his body slowly, and his expression relaxed a bit. Ma Hua looked at the dark corner with a faint smile on his face, saying nothing. Gu Qing walked out from the shadow and asked while looking at the Gu clan leader, "Elder Bai Rujing?" Both of his arms have been chopped off, and he has no chance of cultivation in this life. It's normal for him to be angry. Ma Hua had expected that Gu Qing would show up, so he wasn't surprised. He said with a smile, "What you just said is disrespectful to your master, right?" Gu Qing said calmly, "Disrespectful to one's master is a capital offense. But I'm the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang, who in Aoyama is qualified to be my master." Ma Hua looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot and said, "He is a sword devil. Even if you want to lie to yourself, others won't accept it. Are you going to have another debate? It's so annoying. Can't you hurry up with such a trivial matter?" A lazy voice burst out. Everyone could tell whose voice it was, but for some reason, it sounded a bit slurred today. People looked at the source of the voice and found it came from the platform. The screen had been removed, exposing the table and chairs behind it. Many dishes were placed on the table. Zhuoruzhui was sitting in the chair, eating with chopsticks in his right hand. He didn't forget to talk while chewing. The situation was clear now. The branch of Shinma Peak, which had left Aoyama, and Liangwang Peak, which represented the current Aoyama, were going to confront each other. Yusiluo knew his young brother's temperament well. He shook his head without saying anything, nor did he step onto the platform. Jian Ryun looked at Zhuoruzhui expressionlessly and said, "Young brother Zhuo, are you sure you want to collude with that sword devil? I told you not to debate. It's not that troublesome. Let's have a fight." Zhuoruzhui grabbed a wet towel with his left hand and wiped his mouth. Finding the temperature was just right, he cast an appreciative look at the boss of the Precious Tree House and asked Jianryun, "What was your rank on Liangwang Peak?" "The 4th, replied Jianryun. "You are no match for me." "Let's change to another one," said Zhuoruzhui while looking at Yusiluo. "Big brother, you are the 2nd. Why don't you do it?" Yusiluo snapped, "Can eldest senior brother defeat you?" Zhuoruzhui said, "He could defeat me before I came out from behind closed doors, but he can't after that." Yusiluo asked, "Who else on Liangwang Peak can defeat you?" Zhuoruzhui put down the wet towel in his hand and picked up the chopsticks, saying, "Since nobody can defeat me, why are you still here? Are you going to treat me to a meal?" He was the personal disciple of the immortal Lu Ci. He had the highest cultivation state and the strongest prowess among the younger generation of Aoyama. It could be said that he was invincible among all the 9 peaks. If today's outcome was determined by a fight, it would be impossible to have any other result. Big Brother Nanshan asked you to follow that person to Scenery Garden so that you could keep an eye on the situation there. He didn't ask you to go against our sect and Liangwang Peak. Ma Hua said earnestly while looking at Zhuoruzhui. He didn't try to hide his words from Gu Qing, meaning that he wanted Gu Qing to hear his words on purpose. Since Zhuoruzhui appeared on the stage, the auction concerning the shares of Aoyama had come to an end. The representatives of the major clans, including the Fong clan, left the Precious Tree House one after another, not daring to watch the fight between the immortal masters of Aoyama. "You seem to have forgotten one thing. I've never been a member of Liangwang Peak," Zhuoruzhui said as he picked up the food with his chopsticks. "So don't try to trick me with the rules of benevolence, righteousness, and morality of your Liangwang peak, and don't try to play tricks in front of me. I don't mind telling you that Gu Qing is actually smarter than you even though he looks honest. What on earth do you want to do? Demanded Ma Hua with a gloomy face. Zhuo Ruzhui lifted his head and glanced at him, retorting, "It's none of your business. There are masters who can control you," said Ma Hua. Zhuo Ruzhui said, "I'm a disciple of Aoyama, but Aoyama doesn't have a sect master now. I'm a disciple of Tianguang Peak, but Tianguang Peak doesn't have a peak master. Who can control me?" Jian Ryun said expressionlessly, "Now that you are a disciple of Aoyama, the rules of Aoyama will be able to control you." Zhuo Ruzhui glanced at him sympathetically, saying, "Is it hard to live in the sword jail? It's a pity that I'm on good terms with Shanghai Peak, so it's hard for me to get in there and experience it." Having said that, he withdrew his gaze and continued searching for his favorite dish, the green pepper in the fish maw with pickled peppers. Having said that, there was nothing more to be said. Looking at Zhuo Ruzhui on the platform, who acted as if he were in his own home, Jian Ruyun showed a trace of resentment in his eyes. Since the death of his younger brother, his temperament had changed drastically. Ignoring the look in Yu Sailu's eyes, Jian Ruyun pinched a sword instruction with his right hand and wielded the most powerful move of the old bird sword style, slashing toward the platform. The bright sword light flickered intermittently in the hall, arriving in front of the platform abruptly like a bird shuttling through the clouds. The sword light was hard to detect, so it was hard to block it. But the sword will was resolute and agile. If this sword strike hit the target, even a swordsman in the broken sea state would be wounded severely. Zhuo Ruzhui didn't even lift his head. The chopsticks in his right hand left the plate of fish maw with pickled peppers, pointing at a spot in the air with some gravy on them. Crack! A bright spark appeared in front of the platform. It was the mark left by the collision of two flying swords. Jian Ruyun snorted, and was about to drive his flying sword down again. Zhuo Ruzhui wouldn't give him a chance. The tips of his chopsticks pointed randomly in the air, and the swallowing boat sword turned into a gray sword shadow and arrived in front of Jian Ruyun in the blink of an eye. Jian Ruyun folded his hands and formed a sword will. He called back his flying sword as quickly as possible, blocking the sword in front of him. There was a loud bang. The two swords collided. Jian Ruyun was sent flying backward. His feet left a deep gully on the ground, and he bumped into the wall heavily. The walls of the precious tree house didn't have any windows, and they were protected by a defensive formation, so they were extremely strong. Even so, the walls were shaking violently, as if they were about to collapse. Jian Ruyun was in a terrible situation. His face was as pale as a piece of paper, and his chest was full of blood essence. The flying sword hovering in front of him quivered slightly, a large crack appearing on its body. The most important thing for a swordsman in Aoyama was his flying sword. Since his flying sword was severely damaged, his sword pill must have been cracked as well. It would take him at least 10 years of arduous cultivation to recover. The swallowing boat sword hovered in front of Jian Ruyun a few feet away from him with its head slightly lowered, looking like a sleepy fish, listless. However, everyone could sense the lethal intent exuding from the swallowing boat sword, and it could launch another thunderous strike to kill Jian Ruyun at any moment. It was quiet in the precious treehouse. The disciples of Liangwang Peak, including Ma Hua, all knew that Zhuo Ruzhui was very powerful, but they didn't expect him to be so powerful. Facing Jian Ruyun, who was ranked 4th on Liangwang Peak, he defeated him easily without batting an eyelid. Yu Siluo knew that young brother Zhua had even shown mercy. Otherwise, he could have broken Jian Ruyun's flying sword with the previous strike. Staring at Zhuo Ruzhui with resentment in his eyes, Jian Ruyun said, "If you kill me, I'd like to see how you are going to explain this to the ancestors of Aoyama." "I hate talking about the ancestors. The disciples of Aoyama speak with their swords." Zhuo Ruzhui lifted his head, and pointed at him and those disciples of Liang Wang Peak with his chopsticks, saying, "If your swords aren't as good as mine, you should learn to shut up." Chapter 590. Learning to shut up also meant learning to stop. The people of Aoyama had to learn not to interfere with anything related to Shinma Peak, be it the Gu family or the Precious Tree House. Otherwise, their hands would be chopped off by Zhuoruzhui, just like Jianruyun's sword. Looking at Zhuoruzhui on the platform, Yusiluo sighed and said, "Even if you don't consider yourself a disciple of Liang Wang Peak, you are not a disciple of Shinma Peak either. Since you are not a disciple of Shinma Peak, why do you have to stand up for them in such a violent way?" Zhuoruzhui put down his chopsticks and wiped his mouth with a wet towel. Finding the towel was cold, he glanced at the owner of the Precious Tree House and said, "Big Brother Nanshan knew what I would do when he asked me to go with Senior Grandmaster Jingyang." Ma Hua said with a gloomy expression, "Even if you can stop him today, what if the masters come? If that day comes, we have to ask the Master White Ghost to come. Let's have a good discussion." It was none other than Gu Qing who could make the threat sound so amiable. Ma Hua and the other disciples of Liang Wang Peak fell silent again. In that case, the people of Aoyama would have to ask the Master Night Howler to come. But who could do that? The people of Shinma Peak were the only ones who could make the head guard of Aoyama watch their home and even use them as fighters. Jianruyun stood up and wiped off the blood on the side of his face. He took back his damaged flying sword and stared at Zhuoruzhui, saying, "I'll kill that sword devil one day." "I wish you success," said Zhuoruzhui sympathetically. There was a sudden commotion outside the Precious Tree House. It seemed that someone was kneeling in front of the building and shouting something. Ma Hua listened carefully for a while, and his expression changed abruptly. He abruptly turned to look at Gu Qing and Zhuoruzhui. Tonight, the Jian family and the Ma family each lost 7 important figures. Some of them were worshippers, while others were important figures in the family. In the past few years, the Jian clan and the Ma clan had been suppressed extremely miserably, and their vitality had been greatly damaged. Recently they had finally ushered in a turning point with great difficulty, and were in the process of recovering with great difficulty. These people were extremely important, and they had suddenly encountered such a calamity. What should they do? Ma Hua took a deep breath, forced himself to calm down and said, "You guys actually killed people directly. This is too much." Jianruyun knew what had happened, and the look in his eyes turned furious. Gu Qing said calmly, "These days, 7 people from the Gu family died, and 7 people from each of your families also died. It's very fair." Zhuoruzhui walked down the stage and stood beside him. He suggested, "If you think it's unfair, you can also kill 7 members of the Yuan family of Lelong County." Yuan Chu was a disciple of the Yuan family of Lelong Commandery and a disciple of Shinma Peak. This arrangement was indeed fair. The problem was that Yuan Qijing's surname was also Yuan. "You've crossed the line." Looking at the two of them, Yusiluo said gravely, "No matter who did it, the masters will demand an explanation. It wasn't us, nor was it anyone in Scenery Garden, nor was it the Master White Ghost. It's because we wouldn't do such a thing. What we said just now was out of anger." Zhuoruzhui walked up and patted on Ma Hua's shoulder, saying, "It's probably a senior master of another sect who couldn't bear to see you guys do such a filthy thing." Seeing Zhuoruzhui and Gu Qing walk out of the Precious Tree House, a disciple of Liang Wang Peak couldn't help but ask, "Are you letting them go just like that?" "I've found some clues," Ma Hua said to Yusiluo. "I want to go and have a look." Yusiluo understood what he meant and reminded him, "You can only target the murderer, don't get involved in other matters." The Zhai Xing Tower was the most famous scenic spot in Shangzhou City, as well as the highest tower. It was a must-visit place for tourists. Even Jing Jiu and Zhao Leo had been here before. However, they didn't come to see the Zhai Xing Tower at that time. Instead, they stood on the top of the Zhai Xing Tower, looking at the brightly lit restaurant not far away. That restaurant was a brothel. After more than 30 years, its business was still thriving, so it must have a powerful background. A man wearing a conical hat walked into the brothel. He easily won the favor of the customer with a golden leaf, and even the old he received him in person. The man in the conical hat entered the room, but he didn't ask for girls, food, or good wine. Instead, he asked for 30 snow-white steamed buns, saying that he was a bit hungry. In a place like the brothel, there were all kinds of strange people. As long as the man in the conical hat was generous, the old he could even watch him write a novel in 40 days, let alone eat 30 steamed buns. So the old he did as he was told. The man in the conical hat was generous, and his appetite was also astonishing. In a short while, he had eaten 5 steamed buns and half a pot of strong tea. The old he was obviously different from the old he of other brothels. Because he was indeed a bit old, his deep wrinkles couldn't be covered even with a thick layer of powder. Yet, he was still able to manage this brothel, so he must have some outstanding skills. Watching the man in the conical hat eating the steamed buns in silence, she showed sympathy in her eyes. She poured more tea for him, and took the liberty of having a maid serve 8 small plates of meat and 5 vegetables. Looking at those small plates of worthless dishes, the man in the conical hat was a bit surprised and appreciative. He said to the old he, "This steamed bean curd in chili oil looks good." The old he said with a smile, "It's said to be a local product from the south of Ejo City. Many people think it's good, but I can't taste it. How about 2 more servings for you?" The man in the conical hat nodded, grabbed a handful of golden leaves at random, and said, "After eating, I'll take a nap. I'll disturb you when I'm full." The old he put away the golden leaves without a trace, and stood up, saying, "Please take a rest." It didn't take long for the steamed bean curd in chili oil to be served. It was piled high on a large plate of fish, looking like a mountain of flames. The man in the conical hat ate the steamed bean curd, and slowly ate the steamed buns. The more he ate, the more fragrant they became. He naturally recalled the days when he was in the Bao'ong Zen temple. Tong Lu had died a long time ago. He Zhan was fighting the snow monsters in White Town, and no one knew when he would die. Tong Yen had been missing for many years, and perhaps she had been killed by those people at the Shenhua Peak. When would he be killed by those people at the Shenhua Peak? Half of the mountain of flames formed by the steamed bean curd in chili oil had collapsed, and the 30 steamed buns had disappeared without a trace. The man in the conical hat drank half a pot of warm tea, took off his boots, conical hat and mask, lay down on the soft bed, and closed his eyes to rest. The dim yellow light shone on his green face, making him look eerie. It was easy to kill the 14 members of the Jian family and the Ma family. The only troublesome part was those formations, but it wasn't too difficult for a genius of the deviant sex like him. Su Zai opened his eyes and sighed while looking at the ceiling. As the young master of the mysterious dark sect, he had been ambitious and wanted to conquer the world and compete with the orthodox sections. At the very least, he wanted to find a spiritual source for the mysterious dark sect and get rid of the plight that had lasted for thousands of years. But now, he had become a killer, a postman, and a dirty worker for the Aoyama sect. Well, he was neither a slave of the Aoyama sect nor of the Shenhua Peak. He was a slave of that person. If he wasn't satisfied with the job before, he was quite willing and even a bit proud of it now. That was the immortal Jingyang. Tong Yen had said that Jingjiu had been at the top for a long time. Now that he thought about it, it was all nonsense. If the immortal Jingyang wasn't at the top, then who was? Su Zai took out a few pieces of paper from his chest pocket. Looking at the sentences that he still couldn't understand, he felt hopeful. It was as if he had suddenly seen a sliver of morning light in the endless darkness. The sentences written on the paper were the antidote to the poison of the pill given by Jing Juno, the immortal Jingyang. It was indeed helpful to him, and the effect was miraculous. The poison of the pill hidden in his bone marrow and internal organs was gradually forced out and transformed into an energy similar to the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, gradually spreading to every part of his body. Now, the intervals between the poison of the pill acted up were getting longer and longer, and the demonic wheel was gradually perfected. His cultivation state had improved by leaps and bounds. He believed that neither Zhuoruzhui nor Lu Shisui was a match for him at the moment. Thinking of all this, Su Zai soon recovered his spirit. He got up, put on the mask and the conical hat, and called for the old turtle. The old turtle looked at him and asked with a smile, "What do you like to do?" The old turtle didn't ask about the girls but about the entertainment, because she could tell that this guest with the conical hat was not an ordinary person. Su Zai said to her with a smile, "I like you very much, so I don't want to kill you." The old turtle's smile faded away, and he held the warning magic treasure in his sleeve tightly with his right hand, though he didn't reveal any fear on his face. "It's not easy to understand what you mean," he said lightly. Su Zai said, "Don't misunderstand me. I just want to ask you something and do something, but I don't want anybody else to know about it." The old turtle said with a slightly cold expression, "I'll tell you what I can, otherwise I have no choice but to ask you to leave. A murder happened in this brothel about 30 years ago. A few guards were beheaded by a blood-red flying sword." Su Zai shot a glance at the old turtle and continued, "Judging by your age, you should have heard about this if you had been working here all this time." The old turtle stared into Su Zai's eyes in silence for a long time, and then asked, "How did you know about this? What do you want to do?" Su Zai said, "I'm here to kill some people at someone's request. Since this brothel is still the same, the owner should still be the same owner, right?" The old turtle lowered her gaze a bit and said, "That's right. And coincidentally, the owner is in the brothel today." Su Zai stared into her eyes in silence, saying, "Can I take it that you know very well who I should kill?" The old turtle lifted her head and combed the hair by her temples, looking like a young girl. "Please follow me," she said calmly. Su Zai started killing. He killed from the 3rd floor to the 1st floor, and from the front floor to the backyard. Except for the prostitutes and some servants, he killed almost all the guards and caretakers. The old turtle followed him all the time. After the owner of the brothel was killed by Su Zai, the old turtle finally felt relieved and almost fell to the ground. She managed to steady herself by holding on to a green tree in the yard. She covered her chest with her hands, with tears in her eyes. Su Zai shot a glance at her and knew that it was not sadness but relief. "Why?" he asked. The old turtle asked back, "Why did you do all these things?" "I don't know," Su Zai said. "It was someone else's request." The old turtle's eyes suddenly brightened as she asked, "Can I know who that person is?" "No," Su Zai replied. The light in the old turtle's eyes grew dimmer, but they didn't turn into a deathly gray color. They were as tranquil as a deep well. Su Zai said, "Many people have seen you following me. I'll take you to a place later and hide you well. A few days later, I'll find a new place to live with the money I collected today. You'll live the rest of your life well." The old turtle turned around and looked at the burning brothel, saying slowly, "I'm almost 50 years old, and I've been here all my life. How can I live the rest of my life well?" Chapter 591. 3 days later, the order to seal off the city of Shangzhou was lifted. The Pure Heaven Bureau shifted their search to the outside of the city, and they strengthened their efforts to wipe out the remaining deviant forces. In the evening, Su Zai walked out of the city leisurely with the conical hat on his head. The city gate of Shangzhou closed slowly behind him. The darkness of night enshrouded the fields. He took the last ferry boat to cross the Qinchun River and arrived in the midst of the mountains where spring was more vigorous. During the first half of the night, the mountains looked like countless giants against the backdrop of the gloomy sky. The giants held hundreds of invisible ropes in their hands, blocking all the paths. A few sword lights illuminated the cliffs, and the formations hidden in the cliffs revealed their traces. Let me introduce myself. I'm Ma Hua, a disciple of Aoyama. All the battles on Liangwang Peak in the last 50 years are my doing. Ma Hua looked at Su Zai with narrowed eyes, and said with a faint smile, "What do you think of the formations I've prepared for you today?" Looking at the surrounding peaks, Su Zai said, "Encircling 3 and letting 1 go is a good idea in the military strategy, but how can you keep me here? If it were the complete sword formation of Aoyama, how could I trick you into coming here?" Ma Hua said, "I'm keeping you here with a person." No sooner had he said this than a sword rope dangled down from the cliff. A woman was tied to the end of the rope. She was the old cucumber in Shangzhou. The old cucumber's face was pale, her eyes showing extreme fear. As she was about to call for help, she suddenly closed her mouth when she saw the man wearing the conical hat at the foot of the mountain. She bit her lips so hard that it bled. Su Zai understood what Ma Hua meant, and he couldn't help but laugh out, asking, "Do you know who I am?" If Ma Hua knew that he was the former young master of the mysterious dark sect and a famous deviant cultivator, he wouldn't have threatened him with a prostitute. "I don't know who you are, but I know this old cucumber is very important to you, otherwise why would you do such a terrible thing for her?" Ma Hua continued with a faint smile, "Of course, if you tell me who you are and tell me about the conspiracy between you and Shima Peak, I can let her go and spare your life." Su Zai was speechless. He shook his head with a smile and turned around, heading toward the Qinchun River. A sword chime rang out, followed by a muffled groan. A bloody hole appeared on the old turtle's body. The pain was unbearable, and sweat drenched the hair on his forehead. Su Zai halted his steps and said to Ma Hua, "She's just a regular prostitute, she has nothing to do with me." Ma Hua said, "Maybe it's the truth, but I have to try to the extreme. Later, I will try to cut off her flesh with the flying sword. How many pieces do you think I can cut?" Su Zai said, "They all say that we are deviant devils, but it looks like you disciples of Aoyama are much more deviant than me." Ma Hua said, "Follow the right path and don't question her heart. If she can use her life to capture you, she will die a worthy death." The young disciples of Liangwang Peak thought their senior brother's words made sense. If they wanted to eliminate evil, they should do whatever they could. Yusiluo stood on a peak and frowned when he heard this. He thought that the man in the bamboo hat was wrong, but the cultivation level of the man in the bamboo hat was too high, so he couldn't stop him. Su Zai didn't want to deal with these idiots, so he turned around and headed toward the Qinchun River again. The expression on Ma Hua's face changed slightly, wondering if he had miscalculated. A hint of fierceness flashed in his eyes, and the flying sword shot up into the sky again, slashing toward the old turtle in front of the cliff. A light blue sword light flew over from the high sky and hit the flying sword precisely. Guananshan landed in front of the cliff. Yusiluo and the other disciples of Liangwang Peak were startled to see their senior brother, and they all rode their swords to meet him. Guananshan waved his hand to cut off the sword ropes and brought the old turtle to the ground with the blue ocean sword. He looked at Ma Hua and said, "Those who want to achieve great things shouldn't be bothered by trifles, but this is not a trifles." Ma Hua had been Guananshan's disciple for many years, so he knew his temperament very well. He knew that Guananshan was truly angry, so he knelt down and said, "Young brother knows he's wrong. After returning to Aoyama, you'll go to the Shanghai Peak to receive your punishment and reflect on your mistakes for a few years in the sword jail." Guananshan turned around and looked at the figure that had already dashed to the distance. He raised his eyebrows slightly, wondering who that man with the conical hat was and why he could move so fast and strangely. Ma Hua was startled, but his countenance remained unchanged. He looked at those young disciples of Liangwang Peak, his eyes gloomy and cold. Nothing happened. His gloomy and cold eyes suddenly turned warm. It was because a bright red sword light happened to pass by. Ma Hua's head fell off his neck, rolling on the ground for a long distance. A faint sword ghost drifted out from the broken neck, looking a bit perplexed. Soon, it was torn into pieces by the remaining sword wills. Guananshan turned around and looked at the two corpses on the ground, remaining silent. The blood-red sword light passed through the dark peaks and headed toward the southeast. The old turtle knelt on the ground, putting his palms together in front of the blood-red sword light, tears streaming down his face. Gu Qing had something to do, Zhao Leo had someone to kill, and Su Zai was in charge of the execution. Yuan Chu had something more important to do, but he had to do it by himself. Fortunately, he was going to Aoyama, so there shouldn't be any trouble. He didn't expect that he would be stopped outside the mountain gate of the South Pine Pavilion before he entered Aoyama. "What's going on?" Yuan Chu asked Mingguishing. He regretted that he didn't ask the sect master for the command board. Otherwise, he could have flown over the great formation of Aoyama directly, and none of this would have happened. Mingguishing said innocently while rubbing his gray hair, "It's strictly controlled now. Everyone who enters Aoyama must be verified by the Shilai Peak." Seeing Mingguishing rubbing his hair, and wearing an innocent expression, Yuan Chu was even more annoyed, wondering why everyone wanted to learn from the Shinma Peak. He didn't have the patience to wait here. He waved his hand to dismiss Mingguishing and walked toward the mountain gate. A few cracks suddenly appeared in the air on the mountain path, and there were even a few twists and turns in the middle. The traces were quite eerie, blocking his way. If Yuan Chu weren't very familiar with this sword style and his swift movements, he would have been wounded. A few disciples of the Shilai Peak landed on the mountain path and yelled at Yuan Chu, "You dare to intrude into our mountain gate. Take him down." Yuan Chu was baffled. He pointed at his own face and asked, "Don't you know me?" The Shenma Peak was the loneliest. Those who lived there liked to cultivate in seclusion and rarely came into contact with other peaks. Only Yuan Chu's situation was slightly different, because he needed to go to the Shanghai Peak and run many errands. A disciple of the Shilai Peak said expressionlessly, "Of course we know you are from the Sword Demon lineage. Since you have been banished from Aoyama, you are no longer a disciple of Aoyama. Hurry up and surrender." Yuan Chu was so angry that he laughed. He asked, "Where are you going to send me after you capture me?" The disciple of the Shilai Peak said, "Of course we will send you to the Shanghai Peak and put you in the sword jail." Yuan Chu was furious. He scolded, "I wanted to go to the Shanghai Peak anyway." The disciples of the Shilai Peak didn't care what he said. They summoned their flying swords and attacked him. The real sword of the Shilai Peak was the 7-apricot sword technique. The sword moves were strange and difficult to judge. Moreover, it contained the profound meaning of Taoist magic, making it hard to parry. However, after Yuan Chu entered the Shinma Peak, he had been learning the 7-apricot sword technique. Jingjiu even picked a good sword for him that was very suitable for the 7-apricot sword technique. Moreover, the name given by Jingjiu had the word Chu in it. Not to mention the realm, in terms of the mastery and talent of the 7-apricot sword technique, how many people in the Shilai Peak were better than him? The light gray sword light illuminated the south mountain gate. The ice crystals on the sword body emitted a cold light, which naturally created the image of the winter plum blossoms in the snow. Yuan Chu's 7-apricot sword technique was steeper, more dangerous, and more mysterious than the disciples of the Shilai Peak. After a few muffled groans, several bloody wounds appeared on the bodies of the Shilai Peak disciples, and they fell to the side of the mountain road one after another. If Yuan Chu used the killer move of the 7-apricot sword technique, these disciples of the Shilai Peak would probably die on the spot. The disciples of the Shilai Peak looked at Yuan Chu in shock, and even a little scared. It was said that Yuan Chu was the least talented person in the Shenma Peak. Why was his swordsmanship so strong? Moreover, weren't you a disciple of the Shenma Peak? How could you know the secret sword of the Shilai Peak? How could that light gray flying sword be so powerful? Could it be another flying sword of the fairy grade? A disciple of the Shilai Peak was in a trance because of the blood on his body. He asked subconsciously, "What sword is this?" Yuan Chu was stunned. He thought that he should ask his master or the sect master to give him a name when he returned to Cloudy Town. The sword fight at the South Mountain Gate soon alerted the masters of the peaks. An elder of the Shilai Peak, Qi Yan, and the others came riding their swords. The disciples of the Shilai Peak were overjoyed. They thought that the elder of the peak would not be partial to Yuan Chu, and Qi Yan of the Shanghai Peak was known to be strict and fair. Qi Yan looked at the disciples of the Shilai Peak and asked, "What's going on?" The disciples of the Shilai Peak were about to say something, but Qi Yan snorted coldly and said, "What a mess!" With this cold snort, an extremely cold sword will spread to both sides of the mountain road, and some snowflakes fell from the sky. The name of the flowing snow sword style sounded gentle, but in fact, it was extremely lethal and powerful. The disciples of the Shilai Peak stopped breathing and could no longer speak. Qi Yan looked at the elder of the Shilai Peak and said, "I don't care what senior brother Fong wants to do, but it's better for such stupid disciples to stay at the Shilai Peak and teach them for 2 more years." The elder of the Shilai Peak looked terrible, but he knew that he was in the wrong today. He said, "I'll teach them a good lesson when we get back." The disciples of the Shilai Peak couldn't speak, but they could hear the conversation between their masters. They felt wronged and wondered what they had done wrong. The elder of the Shilai Peak glanced at the disciples and sighed. He turned around and left. If it had been Gu Qing, Zhuoruzhui, or even Zhao Leu who came back from Scenery Garden today, the disciples of the Shilai Peak could have found a reason to keep them outside. But Yuan Chu was the most special one. The elders of the peaks of Aoyama were all smart people. After so many years, who didn't know the relationship between Yuan Chu and the Shanghai Peak? Fang Jingtian needed Yuan Qijing's support, so how could he offend the Shanghai Peak at this time? Qi Yan turned around and looked at Yuan Chu. His expression was much softer and his tone was also very gentle. He said, "Ask someone to send a message. I'll send someone to pick you up." Yuan Chu widened his eyes and said, "Martial uncle, I'm a disciple of Aoyama. Do I need anyone's permission to go back?" Chapter 592. Many brothels wrote, "Old Ma," as Old Ma yesterday. I don't know what's going on. As for the name of Yuan Chu's sword, some readers named it Plum Sword. I think it's quite handsome and interesting. Do you have any good ideas? But don't use the same unconventional sword names as those of Yuan Chu. Yuan Chu went to the Shangda Peak. He spent some time climbing the mountain to have a good talk with young sister Yushan. He told her about the important events outside Cloudy Town, which made Yushan feel a sense of yearning. When she heard that the immortal Tan had gone to Cloudy Town in person and invited Jingjiu to become the sect master of the Zhongzhou school, she was even more surprised. After arriving in the extremely cold manor cave on the peak top, Yuan Chu knelt down and kowtowed to Yuan Qijing many times, and answered Yuan Qijing's questions in detail. After that, he stood up and jumped into the well while rubbing his waist a few times. Stepping on the curved flying sword, Jingjiu landed on the ground along with the sunlight. He knelt down and kowtowed to the dead dog many times before heading to the deep part of the sword jail. After arriving in the Hermit Peaks with a sky as blue as the porcelain and as beautiful as an illusion, Yuan Chu passed by the flowers all over the mountains and fields and found the manor cave where Tong Yen lived. There is a formation outside, but it should have lost its effect a long time ago. Why don't you go out? It's good that you're still here. I'm worried that the sect master might have miscalculated. What if you were killed by that Apiao? Yuan Chu said, I don't want to see a pile of white bones as soon as I come in. I'm not afraid of it, but I feel a bit uncomfortable thinking that it's someone I know. Tong Yen opened her eyes and looked at him in silence for a while. I heard that Lu Shui was a chatterbox, she said. Yuan Chu said, I'm not imitating Big Brother Shui. You don't know this, but we are all talkative, including Zhuoruzhui. It's just that the sect master and my master don't like to talk, so we have been suppressing ourselves. Tong Yen raised her hand to stop him from talking and asked, I'm recuperating. What's the matter? Yuan Chu said, Sect leader Shu is asking if you want to go out. Tong Yen said, It's very quiet here. No need. Yuan Chu continued, Marshal Uncle Head still has a lot of things to ask you about Zhongzhou School. Think about it carefully before you write it down. I'll come back to get it in a few days. After saying this, he took out a few pieces of paper and handed them over. There were 2 or 3 questions on each piece of paper, and there was a blank space between the questions, which was probably left for Tong Yen to write the answers. There's still a test? Tong Yen took the paper and had the same sentimental feeling as Su Zai did, wondering how a person like him became an idler on the Shinma Peak. Different from Su Zai, he still didn't know what had happened at the inauguration ceremony of the sect master of Aoyama, nor did he know that Jingjiu might be the immortal Jingyang. As such, he felt even more speechless. After leaving the Shanghai Peak, Yuan Chu went to Yunxing Peak first. As the second last disciple on the Shinma Peak, he had only one young brother, so he had thought a long time ago that he had to treat this young brother well. However, his young brother was forgotten by everyone in Aoyama, and it was not until many days later that he was remembered, which made him feel a bit guilty. Clouds were traveling everywhere on Yunxing Peak, but those clouds were full of sword wills, which were not as gentle as the clouds in Cloudy Town. Yuan Chu's cultivation state wasn't low, but the higher he climbed, the harder it was for him. The main reason was that his eyes were pierced by the sword wills, making him want to shed tears. The higher he climbed, the more tears he shed, and the redder his eyes became. His remorse toward his young brother gradually turned into complaints. Why did you climb so high for no reason? The peak top was not far away. The iron eagle was hovering in the sky. Yuan Chu rubbed his eyes and finally found his young brother. Ping Yongkao was sleeping soundly in the cave he had dug out. It was evident that he was sleeping rather than cultivating, because his cross-legged knees had loosened a long time ago. He leaned against the cliff rock with his eyes closed, his eyelashes unblinking, his face ruddy and his snores vaguely audible. Looking at his young brother's face, Yuan Chu admired him for being able to sleep so soundly in such a formidable and terrifying world of sword wills. Since Ping Yongkao was fine, he waited for him to wake up according to Jingjiu's instruction. Yuan Chu walked down Yunxing Peak and went to Shinma Peak. The inhibition of Shinma Peak had been opened, and he couldn't go up there without the thoughtless sword. So he greeted the monkeys at the foot of the peak and said, to make sure there was nothing wrong in the peak, and then he set off on his way back. When he returned to Cloudy Town, the flowers on the trees wilted in the early summer wind, and the water in the stream became much heavier. But Scenery Garden was still so cool and pleasant, because there was a huge blue ice cube in the courtyard, emitting a bone-piercing chill. Apiao was frozen in the ice cube. She opened her eyes wide, looking at the faces and sceneries outside the ice cube that were deformed by the refraction of light. She thought that if she had known that she would come here, she wouldn't have left. It was difficult to gather all the peak masters for the Aoyama meeting in previous years, and it was even more difficult to gather this year. Yuan Qijing didn't show up as usual. Tianguang Peak was empty. Nanwang claimed to be behind closed doors. The poor Qin Yutian was sent to the West Ocean by Fong Jingtian again because of the white ghost. Zhao Lei was in Cloudy Town. As a result, only 4 people were left in the Grand Hall in front of Xilai Peak. Qi Yan attended the meeting as the representative of Shangda Peak. Fu Wang, the peak master of Yunxing, asked, "What are you going to do with the Gu clan and the Precious Tree House?" "I don't think it's appropriate," Guang Yuan Jinren said emotionlessly, similar to the Immortal Tan, the sect master of Zhongzhou School. Shirue Peak was nominally in charge of the distribution of the cultivation resources in Aoyama. If Guang Yuan Jinren insisted on his opinion, it would be unjustifiable for Aoyama to do something to the Precious Tree House and the Gu clan. Fu Wang said, "The problem is that Shinma Peak has gone too far, they have to be punished." Fong Jingtian shot a glance at Qi Yan and asked, "What does Shangda Peak have to say about it?" Jian Ruyun insists that the deaths of his family and the Ma clan were caused by those in Cloudy Town. Qi Yan continued expressionlessly, "But there is no evidence to prove it. I told him to stop bothering about this matter." No evidence to prove it? Fu Wang was the peak master of Yunxing, so he had to protect Jian Ruyun, who came from Yunxing Peak. He asked while staring into Qi Yan's eyes. That deviant swordsman outside Shangzhou City was on the verge of being captured. Why did the thoughtless sword of Zhao Lei show up? Qi Yan didn't back off, saying while staring at him icily, "Guananshan has already made it clear that Zhao Lei went there with him. What's the problem?" Guang Yuan Jinren signaled for them to stop arguing. He turned to Fong Jingtian and said, "The most important thing right now is the visit of the Immortal Tan to Cloudy Town. Do you really think he will join Cloud Dream Mountain?" Fong Jingtian asked nonchalantly. "It's just a trick of using the enemy as leverage." Guang Yuan Jinren said, "What if he did go there? You people have expelled him from Aoyama, but this can't be counted as betraying the mountain gate." Fong Jingtian understood what he meant, saying expressionlessly, "Let's stop here then. As long as those people behave themselves, nothing will happen." It had been a year since Jing Jiu and the others had left Aoyama. It was snowing in the cold winter, and the New Year festival was approaching. Cloudy Town was as busy as usual, and no one could be seen outside the patch of fog. Some cultivation practitioners who didn't want to give up stayed in the town, looking at the fog in the distance. They didn't care too much about the New Year festival, and they didn't need to go back to spend time with their families. As such, the hot pot business in the restaurants was as good as ever. Though the cultivation practitioners didn't care about the New Year festival, it didn't mean that they didn't celebrate it. The interactions between the cultivation sects were essentially the same as the interactions between the clans in the human world. They both needed to visit each other and send gifts to maintain their relationship. As the leading sect of the orthodox sects, the Aoyama sect was naturally the one who received the gift. According to the usual practice, the New Year festival gifts of various sects were sent to Aoyama one after another. The southern sects were led by important figures. Of course, they wouldn't stay in Aoyama for too long, and they would leave after sitting for a while at Xilai Peak. It was interesting that these sects didn't leave directly this year. They would stop at Cloudy Town on their way back, regardless of whether they were on the way back or not. The chests and invitation cards were piled up in front of the perennial flowering trees. It was then that the people realized that the various sects had left a New Year festival gift for that person in Scenery Garden. The gifts left for Scenery Garden by the Platonist sect, the Mirror sect, and the Ozawa sect were especially valuable, comparable to the gifts given by their own sects in Aoyama. Soon after, another shocking piece of news came from Zhaoga City. The Pure Heaven Bureau gave 1/3 of the resources of the Aoyama sect to Scenery Garden, and it would continue until the Plum meeting 4 years later. The attitude of the imperial court and these sects was quite obvious. The suppression of the Gu clan and the Precious Tree House by some people in Aoyama sect was blocked. Scenery Garden had a special status in people's hearts. There were clouds on Cloud Dream Mountain as well, and the scenery there was better than that of Scenery Garden. By the high platform on the cliff, a large tree extended outward, its leaves golden all year round, looking beautiful and marvelous. "Aoyama is still conscious," said the immortal Tan as he walked to the edge of the cliff and looked at the ocean of clouds in the south. Baijinren came to his side and said, "No matter whether he is Jingyang or the All-in-One, it would be best if he could come to Cloud Dream Mountain. However, you and I are well aware that it's impossible." The reason he retreated was not to protect himself, but to prevent a civil war in Aoyama. "I think Taiping has the same idea. That's why Fong Jingtian withdrew his troops," the immortal Tan said expressionlessly, "and Yuan Qijing is still alive." The current situation in the cultivation circle was clear. No one could replace the immortal Lu Ci, and Fong Jingtian had just entered the heavenly arrival state, so he was still far from being a match for the figures in the upper state. In comparison to the Zhongzhou school, the Aoyama sect was still a bit weaker. If these ideas can't be realized, we will have no choice but to fight against Aoyama head-on. The human world is beautiful but fragile. I'm worried that we can't stand it. The immortal Tan said this with a sympathetic expression while looking in the direction of Zhaoga City. Baijinren asked while looking at his profile, "What do those at the back of the mountain say?" The immortal Tan said, "Those old men are either as calm as still water or as dry as a well. They have no desire to deal with the affairs of the human world. Ko Qingtong is the only one who has some desire." Hearing the name of Ko Qingtong, the mist on Baijinren's face dispersed a bit, her eyebrows furrowed slightly. It was evident that even she felt it was a bit troublesome. The immortal Tan said calmly, "The bloody demon church has been destroyed, and he has been on the Cloud Dream Mountain for 1,000 years. His ferocious and stubborn nature has been erased a long time ago. If we want the human world to suffer less, we have to win the Battle of Zhaoga City as soon as possible. When we need him to strike, we can't hesitate." Baijinren said, "If we can kill both Taiping and Jingyang, we have to use him." The immortal Tan said, "This pair of brothers have unparalleled intelligence, but their cultivation states are too low. What I'm worried about is the attitude of Zen Master and that person in White Town." Looking at the ocean of clouds in the north, Baijinren said, "If that's the case, we have no choice but to kill them both." They referred to Zen Master and the broadsword King Chao Yuan. Even the center sect would have a hard time killing these two swordsmen. Yet, Baijinren said it as if it was a matter of course. After a moment of silence, the immortal Tan changed the topic, saying, "Little Zhao cooks a table full of dishes for us every year at this time." This place was not the main valley of the Cloud Dream Mountain, but the manor cave of Bai Zhao. Baijinren's voice didn't grow any gentler, it was still as nonchalant as before. "The dishes she cooks are not as good as Tong Yan's." "Let's go and see her," said the immortal Tan. The ocean of clouds drifted up slowly, passing over the golden trees and covering the entire high platform. The immortal Tan and Baijinren came to the great formation of Cloud Dream. This place was deep under the ground, and it was dark all around. The spiritual source emitted a faint green glow once in a while, looking like the veins of a leaf. In addition to the glow of the spiritual source, a pair of huge deep yellow eyes could be seen in the darkness, which were the eyes of the unicorn. The unicorn was gazing at the distance with a nervous expression in his eyes. Even he felt a great deal of pressure. There was a stone platform in the deepest part of the great formation of Cloud Dream, where a great deal of spiritual energy gathered. Bai Zhao sat there with his eyes closed, the white ribbon tousling without the aid of the wind. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.